and answered by all the world's great religions, but in particular through the words of the Hebrew prophet Micah. What does the Lord require of us? To do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. The intractable problems facing humanity cannot be solved by any one nation unilaterally. Immature multilateralism is required to address satisfactorily rampaging climate change in the age of the Anthropocene, to resolve the threats posed by nuclear weapons and their further spread, to pursue peaceful coexistence rather than conflict, terrorism, and war, to reform the system of financing for development, inclusive of a just climate financing, to tackle successfully the growing challenges of artificial intelligence, to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, be guided by the Global Digital Compact and the Pact for the Future, and to reshape global governance more inclusively. It is thus of the highest importance for this august body, the United Nations, and the overwhelming majority of nation states within it, to continue our efforts to persuade the powerful to act equitably, honorably, and multilaterally, to tackle efficaciously the extant and looming challenges facing the global community. Oftentimes, it is frustrating and disheartening to those of us who are committed to this necessary and desirable path of mature multilateralism, because our Herculean efforts seemingly deliver correspondingly negligible results. Nevertheless, we cannot give up. We cannot afford to get weary. We have no choice but to persist in this ever more urgent multilateral solidarity and cooperation as we pursue the political and economic spaces to make this world a better place for all humanity. Your Excellencies, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, like all countries globally, have been shaped by our history and geography, our nature and neighbors, our extant circumstances, and our dreams for a better future. For example, we carry the benefits and the burdens of our geographic location, near to the greatest economic, military, scientific, and culturally dominant power the world has ever seen. St. Vincent and the Grenadines is where it is. It cannot be lifted up and taken to Vladivostok or the mouth of the Amur River. Yet, as a free and independent people, we have the right to pursue peacefully and securely our quest for shared prosperity without domination, interference, or intervention from any of our neighbors or from any power that comes from afar. Today, as I speak, my government and my people have another challenge from the nefarious activities of the agents of a rising or risen hegemon from another hemisphere, and from some greedy, unprincipled, non-state operators in Europe, acting in concert, seeking to pollute and interfere in our democracy, our free and fair elections, which are scheduled to be held later this year. Their conduct is unacceptable and hugely injurious to our people. Your Excellencies, the raging genocide and neocolonial oppression being committed against the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank before our very eyes on global television and are continuing affronts to the elemental rights of the Palestinians, to civilized conduct, and to international law. How can one state, a member of this august body, act with such impunity against defenseless men, women, and children? Surely, the hottest part of hell is reserved for those perpetrators of genocide and those who are complicit in it. Over 200 years ago, the British committed large-scale genocide against the indigenous people of my country. And we are still suffering, enduring the historical legacies of underdevelopment therefrom. Similarly, the genocidal enslavement of African bodies in our Caribbean, in our hemisphere. It will take centuries for the pain, suffering, and legacies of the current genocide of the Palestinians to be repaired. We in the Caribbean are today demanding justly reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, which occurred centuries ago. This tragedy, this madness that has been unfolding unabated in Palestine must stop. Israel's recent expansion of this war against the Palestinian nation in the state of Qatar is unacceptable. We stand in solidarity with Qatar. Your Excellencies, St. Vincent and Grenadines calls urgently for a lasting peace across the Taiwan Straits and the participation of Taiwan in the specialized agencies of the United Nations. It is a continuing absurdity that this country of 23 million people, a functioning democracy with a settled yearning for self-determination, a legitimate institutional expression of the Chinese civilization, with first world living standards, a land of peace and ingenuity, cannot be properly accommodated in the global bodies concerned with health, climate change, civil aviation, policing, and so forth. Similarly, it is long overdue that the fractured relationship between the United States of America and Cuba be made whole in mutual respect, in accordance with international law and consistent with the interests of both neighbors for peace, security, and shared prosperity. St. Vincent and the Grenadines implores the great American nation, and it is a great nation, to listen and act upon the near unanimous advice of this General Assembly, which has repeatedly called for an end to the oppressive, unlawful embargo against Cuba. I am calling for a mature conversation between the United States of America and Cuba. Likewise, the recent ramping up of tensions between the USA and the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela is most unhelpful to peace and stability in our Caribbean and Latin America. St. Vincent and the Grenadines calls for the scaling back of actions and rhetoric which are so inimical to cordial neighborly relations. In particular, we find the foreign militarization of the waters around Venezuela exceedingly troubling. Repeatedly, the countries of the Caribbean and Latin America have unanimously declared our area a zone of peace. We urge our American friends to abide by this declaration. By all means, let us cooperate in combating drug trafficking and allied transnational criminal activities. But a unilateral militarization is decidedly not the way to go. Also, again, I'm imploring my American and Venezuelan friends to sit down maturely and talk through these problems so that we can have a resolution. In Haiti, matters political, economic, and social continue to deteriorate. Gang violence continues unabated, and a veritable Hobbesian state of nature exists in which life is nasty, brutish, and short. Haiti's political and economic elites have been found wanting, but it is true, too, that the international community with the means to assist has not as yet summoned up the will to do so. A solution is required in accord with the Haitian people's deepest longings for peace, security, and a normal civilized life and living. The UN Security Council, with CARICOM's full support, is seized of this matter, but an insufficiency of resources and will have attended it. So too, the pain and suffering in South Sudan demand immediate relief and more. Your Excellencies, in November this year, the Conference of Parties under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change gathered once more on this occasion in the great nation of Brazil. The issue of climate change is urgent and existential. The science is clear, and there has been a growing, even overwhelming global consensus as to what is required to be done. But sadly, some powerful and other influential countries are backsliding and reneging on their earlier commitments. Excellencies, just over a year ago, on July the 1st, 2024, a Category 4 Hurricane Beryl devastated my country. Lives were lost, and damage and loss amounting to 1/3 of our gross domestic product was incurred. In particular, 20% of our houses were either severely damaged or destroyed. We have been rebuilding and recovering stronger and better than ever. We thank our regional and international partners, including worthy non-governmental entities, for their solidarity, without which our tasks of reconstruction would have been even more onerous. We thank, too, our diaspora. But to tell the truth, we have had to rely mainly on our own efforts at home. There's much, much more left to be done. And I again plead for the enhanced support of our friends, our allies, and Good Samaritans. Our people's resilience, creativity, and disciplined endeavors have been a marvel to behold. This is a testimony to our people's genius and the coming to the fore of our people's hidden rationalities, their hitherto submerged resources and abilities, a renaissance of their spirit, and the reaffirmation of the idea of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Madam President, I conclude with 5 reaffirmations for those from the dominant metropoles of the West and the East who may possess the good sense to listen to some friendly advice from a spokesperson from the periphery. First, do not think ever that our mouths would be muzzled by the food that we eat to live. Secondly, know it well that while some sleep to dream, the rest of us dream to change the world for the better. Thirdly, we have a voice, and this voice will never be stilled. Fourthly, we are not better than anyone, and no one is better than us. And finally, we too have a history of civilized life and living with a trajectory for further advancement and ennoblement. We are not appendages of any other nation. We are a free and independent people made in the image and likeness of God. We are the embodiment of the idea of St. Vincent and Grenadines. We are friends of all, and we strive for a better world. We are a small nation, demonstrably like other small nations, capable of mighty deeds. Excellencies, we are small states, but we have an important role to play in global affairs to the betterment of all. Imperial giants and hegemons, whether from the West or the East, must not hold us back. Together, we have an obligation not to desecrate our future. Thank you. I'm obliged.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister and Minister for National Security, Legal Affairs and Information of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Luc Frieden, Prime Minister of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Secretary General, the Second World War was the deadliest conflict in history. It took the combined efforts of 50 nations to resist the Axis powers and end their seemingly unstoppable campaign of conquest and subjugation. But in the course of their struggle, Allied countries, including my own, found a second, even bigger purpose. They would end the war, and they would seek to end war itself. They were driven by a dream of a world in which conflict is replaced by cooperation, oppression by freedom, and misery by prosperity. They were driven by hope, not fear, unwavering in their belief that the world could be changed for the better. A world of peace in which war would be prevented not just for their generation, but for all those to come after them. A world of justice in which the relations between the nations would be governed not by force, but by law. A world of freedom in which people do not face oppression, but enjoy fundamental rights without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. These ideals go hand in hand. Peace, justice, freedom, dignity, human rights, international law. Looking back, and indeed at the current state of world affairs, it is painfully obvious that we are not always living up to those ideals. The last few years have seen an unprecedented erosion of international norms and violations of humanitarian law. The international order is at a breaking point. Too few defend it. Too many have lost faith in it. For Luxembourg, the United Nations still represents the highest of mankind's ambitions. As much as the United Nations represents these ideals, it represents a different method, a paradigm shift in the way countries deal with each other and their common challenges. Words, not weapons. Diplomacy, not warfare. Solidarity, not confrontation. The establishment of the United Nations 8 years ago was not the end of the journey to peace. It was the beginning. That journey must be made anew every single day. One that Luxembourg will always be ready to pursue. That journey of dialogue and cooperation, together with all others willing to work for peace. Because war, with all its horrible results, is nothing but the final expression of that radical unwillingness to compromise at the root of all human conflict, that stubborn refusal to even listen to the other side. It is this uncompromising spirit that starts wars, creates divisions, and hinders progress, leaving all of us worse off. The United Nations, however, represents the opposite spirit. It stands for the relentless pursuit of compromise, for the formidable power of reconciliation. But the United Nations as an institution cannot work wonders. Its success depends on all of us. It will work, its ideals can be achieved when we adopt this spirit, in all our decisions. When we work for comprehensive just and lasting peace in Ukraine, respecting Ukraine's sovereignty, self-determination, and territorial integrity. When we work for an immediate ceasefire and full humanitarian access in Gaza, as well as at the same time for the immediate release of all hostages. When we work for the implementation of the two-state solution, with the State of Israel and the State of Palestine living side by side in peace and security. To maintain that objective, this week Luxembourg formally recognized the State of Palestine. When we work to ensure equal rights, to educate all children, to eradicate hunger and disease, and to protect our cultural heritage. And when we work for a United Nations that is fit for purpose, with a more effective and more representative governance, and with the necessary resources to keep pushing us towards our ideals. Luxembourg will be a reliable partner in all these efforts, because we know the value of a stable, multilateral world order. We knew it 8 years ago when our predecessors signed the Charter, and we know it today as one of the largest per capita donors to official development assistance, consistently contributing 1% of our gross national income. Just this week, Luxembourg signed 4 new strategic partnership frameworks with crucial UN agencies. Because the sad lesson of history is that, in the end, when war ends and the dust settles on ruined cities and unnecessary cemeteries, that uncompromising spirit must still give way. And we must still live together. We must still talk and work with each other. We still share a common planet and a common humanity. That realization lies at the origin of this great institution, giving those who lost the war the opportunity of a new start was one of the most far-sighted, even if the least intuitive decision of the 20th century. So I call on all countries to honor the promise made to mankind in San Francisco, that humanity would work together to abandon war and seek peace by taking a new approach, by following a different spirit, the spirit of the United Nations. One that puts dialogue first and makes every effort to settle differences by peaceful means, through mutually acceptable compromises. Let's do it to honor those working here and across the world in the interest of all of humanity, for food security, for refugee protection, for global health, for our environment. Let's do it to honor those generations before us who built this institution, giving us the opportunity to turn their legacy of hope into reality. And above all, let's do it to honor the generations yet to come, who have every right to expect growing up in a world of peace, freedom, and prosperity. Let's recall this spirit today, and let's remember it every day. Every day is a new opportunity to match our words with action, because ultimately, history will judge us by what we do. The United Nations can continue to count on Luxembourg in word and in deed. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Micheál Martin, Taoiseach of Ireland. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
President of the General Assembly, distinguished heads of state and government, Secretary General, Excellencies, friends. It is important to remember what brings us together every year. 80 years ago, the world was emerging from the most savage conflict in our history. 80 million people lay dead. A deliberate industrial-scale genocide aimed at obliterating Europe's Jewish population saw 6 million people murdered, a monstrous crime that remains unsurpassed in human history. People were targeted for death because of their ethnic identity, their sexual orientation, their disability. Cities were laid waste, throttled by siege, firebombed into oblivion, or pulverized by the first and only use of atomic weapons in war. Humanity had descended into the abyss. This United Nations was the phoenix that rose from that darkness, the highest expression of our commitment to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security. It was the best attempt by those who had seen the worst of humanity to offer a different path to future generations. Dag Hammarskjöld, UN Secretary General in the 1950s, captured the reality of that vision best when he stated, "The United Nations was not created to take mankind to heaven, but to save humanity from hell." Since Ireland joined in 1955, the United Nations has been the cornerstone of our foreign policy. There is no member state more committed to its ideals. There is no member state more determined to ensure it succeeds in its mission. And like all member states, we depend on the UN Charter and the protections of international law for our security and well-being. At a time when the world risks slipping back into an order in which might is right and some voices count more than others, it is up to us as leaders to reassert and to insist on the primacy of international cooperation. President, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. I am deeply concerned by the constant pushback on human rights norms that has accelerated in recent years, against women's rights and gender equality, against LGBTQ+ rights. I call out the brutal Taliban for their denial of the most fundamental rights of Afghanistan's women and girls. Ireland continues to work tirelessly to oppose all attempts to dilute existing international commitments and human rights standards. We reaffirm our commitment to honour and comply with the universal nature and the individuality of human rights. To demonstrate that commitment, we will run for a seat on the Human Rights Council from 2027 to 2029. President, conflict is always and everywhere a sign of human failure. Conflict destroys lives. It devastates economic development. It leaves scars and divisions that take generations to heal. We in Ireland know that from experience. On Friday of last week, the Irish and British governments agreed a new framework for addressing the legacy of the conflict in Northern Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement would not have been possible without the support and engagement of the international community, and we are ready to offer the same to others. The Irish people are enormously proud of our 67 years of continuous UN peacekeeping, especially our engagement with UNIFIL and close connection to Lebanon. We remember the members of our defence forces who paid the ultimate price. Continued support for UNIFIL will be essential over the next 15 months to support the efforts of the Lebanese authorities, given the complexity and scale of the challenges in the region. President, in Sudan, a grave humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding. It is more than 2 years since war broke out, and it has unleashed the most unimaginable human suffering on the civilian population. More than 150,000 people are already dead. 12 million people displaced. Vicious sexual violence against women and children. Famine declared throughout the country. The world has failed Sudan. To our collective shame, we have not given this most destructive of wars the same focus and attention as conflict in other parts of the world. But a child in Sudan has the same value, the same right to life and a peaceful childhood as a child born anywhere else in the world. The conflict in Sudan is a human catastrophe that risks wider stability in the region. It must be stopped. And Ireland fully supports the work of the Secretary-General's personal envoy for Sudan, Madame Ramtain Lama Madama, to achieve a negotiated ceasefire, an immediate humanitarian response, and a durable peace. The perpetrators of war crimes in Sudan must be held to account. The jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court should be extended to all of Sudan. 80 years ago, Europe had more reason than most to say never again. Yet today, brutal and bloody war has returned to European soil. In February 2022, Russia, a founding member of the United Nations and a permanent member of its Security Council, launched a full-scale illegal invasion of Ukraine in defiance of international law, in defiance of the UN Charter. It has prosecuted the war with a willful and reckless indifference to its human consequences. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed and maimed. Millions have been forced to flee their homeland. Millions more internally displaced. Russia has deliberately and cynically targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure. It has caused immense environmental devastation. Cities such as Mariupol, Kharkiv, and Bakhmut have been bombed to rubble. Prisoners have been mistreated, children abducted. President Putin has thumbed his nose at every attempt to bring about a ceasefire and negotiations, including those led by President Trump. There are no signs whatsoever that he is ready for peace. He has refused to meet President Zelensky. He has again intensified Russia's attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. He has sought to test the resolve of Ukraine's neighbours, sending drones into Polish and Romanian airspace. He should know that it will not work. He should appreciate how strong the people of Ukraine are and how unbreakable their resolve to defend their country and its independence. And those of us proud to be part of the coalition of the willing in support of Ukraine will stand with them, shoulder to shoulder, for as long as it takes. If Russia chooses not to come to the table, the world must increase economic and political pressure on it until it does. With our European Union and international partners, we will strengthen and tighten our sanctions. And we will also work to increase support for Ukraine. We will put in place the security guarantees that Ukraine needs to underpin any future peace agreement. Ireland strongly believes that Ukraine is part of the European family and that its future lies within the European Union. We will continue to work with our EU partners to ensure its journey towards membership advances as quickly as possible. President, I come now to Gaza, a catastrophe of the most monumental and consequential kind. It is not possible to describe the scale of the physical and psychological suffering endured by the Palestinian people for 2 long and brutal years. Ireland stands in full solidarity with them. We acknowledge those who have worked in the most unimaginably difficult circumstances to preserve and sustain life, to treat the injured, to prevent the displacement and destruction of a people and their rich and irreplaceable cultural heritage. At the heart of this vital effort have been UN agencies and workers, most especially UNRWA. And we remember those among them who have lost their lives. And we pay tribute to the extraordinary bravery of the medics. We honour the journalists who have worked tirelessly and without regard to their own safety to ensure that nobody can ever say, "We did not know." What is happening in Gaza cannot be justified or defended. It is an affront to human dignity and decency. It is an abandonment of all norms, all international rules and law. We are witnessing hunger being used as an instrument of war. Babies starving to death while aid rots at the border. People shot while desperately seeking food for their families. The deliberate targeting and destruction of schools, hospitals, mosques, cultural institutions. The killing of doctors, aid workers, journalists. Dislocation and displacement over and over. We are all witnesses to the immense wrath of one of the world's most modern and best equipped armies brought to bear on a trapped and defenseless civilian population. Last week, the Independent International Commission on the Occupied Territories called it out for what it is. Having examined carefully Israel's conduct of the war since 2023, as well as the actions and statements of senior Israeli military and political figures, it concluded that Israel is responsible for the commission of genocide in Gaza. Genocide, the gravest of crimes in international law. All signatories of the Convention on Genocide are obliged to act to prevent and to punish it. We cannot say we were not aware. In January of last year, the ICJ put all states on notice of the plausibility of the State of Israel committing genocide in its military operations in Gaza. And the court has been clear. Where state parties are able to contribute to the prevention of genocide, they are obliged to employ all means reasonably available to them so as to prevent genocide as far as possible. As Navi Pilar, chair of the Independent Commission, said last week, the prevention of genocide is not a matter of discretion of states. It is a legal and moral obligation, and it admits no delay. All members of this United Nations must reflect on what more they can do. And I especially call on those who have influence to use it urgently to maximum effect. I call on those who have provided and who continue to provide Israel with the means necessary to prosecute its war to reflect carefully on the implications of their actions and the consequences for the Palestinian people. There cannot be business as usual in the face of genocide. As Navi Pilar has made clear, to do nothing is not neutrality, it is complicity. Ireland has intervened in the South African case at the ICJ. We have recognized the state of Palestine. We are legislating against the import of goods from the occupied territories. We will act to prevent those members of the government of Israel who have been instrumental in fomenting the unfolding disaster in Gaza from entering our country. We will continue to work with like-minded partners across the world to bring this human catastrophe to an end. There must be an immediate ceasefire, the release of all remaining hostages, and unimpeded access for humanitarian and aid workers to Gaza. Those responsible for war crimes must be held accountable. There can be no impunity. We also need to hold to account those responsible for the attack on Israel of the 7th of October 2023. That too was a monstrous war crime. I appreciate the profound and continuing impact the trauma has had on the people of Israel. Hamas, not the Palestinian people, were responsible. Hamas must answer for its crimes. Hamas can have no role in the future governance in Palestine. But no crime, however heinous, can justify genocide. We also need to recognize the crimes being perpetrated in the West Bank, the scale and pace of appropriation of Palestinian land by illegal Israeli settlers, the open backing this receives from the Israeli government, the harassment, imprisonment and abuse of the Palestinian population, the withholding of tax revenues from the Palestinian Authority. It must not be allowed to continue. In its advisory opinion published in July 2024, the ICJ was clear that all states are under an obligation not to recognize as legal the situation arising from the unlawful presence of the State of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory and not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the Palestinian territory. The world knows what drives this illegal activity is a determination to render the possibility of a two-state solution impossible. It must not succeed. A two-state solution remains the only prospect for a peaceful future in which the people of Israel and the people of Palestine can live in peace and security side by side. I welcome the decision to recognize the state of Palestine taken by France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and others. I commend France and Saudi Arabia for the leadership they are providing in working towards a political process that can deliver a just, lasting peace and security in the region. They have my full support. President, as it marks its 80th anniversary, the United Nations has never been more necessary. Today's challenges are ever more complex and ever more interconnected. They cannot be solved by any country or region acting alone. The threat to the future of our planet and the wonder of its biodiversity, the need for development, leaving nobody behind, the health and well-being of our people, the protection of our shared cultural heritage in all its magnificent diversity, the stability of our economies and our ability to trade fairly, the immense opportunity of the digital revolution, but also the potential consequences for our shared humanity. The United Nations is not perfect, and it needs to reform to reflect a very different world. I pay warm tribute to the role that Antonio Guterres has played as Secretary General during his term in office in that regard. The UN continues to represent the best of humanity. If it falters, it is not because it is no longer relevant, it is because we as leaders have let it down. Let this be remembered as a time when we reaffirmed our commitment to multilateralism, to the rule of law, to a reformed United Nations fit for purpose and for the future. As we did in the Charter, let us seek to save this and future generations from war. Let us reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of each human person. Let us work to establish conditions in which justice and respect for international law can be maintained. And as we pledged in the Charter, let us never cease to promote social progress and better standards of life for all in ever larger freedom. Thank you very, very much indeed. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Taoiseach of Ireland. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Muhammad Yunus, Chief Advisor of the Interim Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. I request protocol to please escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Madam President, I congratulate all member states on the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter. This session is especially important both for looking back at our journey and for shaping the road ahead. Over the past 8 decades, the UN has steadily expanded its scope of work and deepened its engagement in many areas. It has played an indispensable role in advancing peace and security, in promoting human rights, in improving lives across the world, and in upholding justice, fairness, and equality. Because of the UN, today more than 130 million vulnerable people in 120 countries receive urgent food and humanitarian support. Nearly 45% of the world's children are immunized through its efforts. Its agencies stand by those in distress, delivering food, clean water, sanitation, vaccines, and other life-saving services in every corner of the world. At the same time, we have also witnessed the limitations of the UN in resolving conflicts between states and in confronting major global challenges. Yet, on the whole, its role has been overwhelmingly positive and beneficial for humanity. Madam President, last year, in this August Assembly, I spoke to you from a country that had just witnessed a popular uprising. I shared with you our aspirations for transformation. Today, I stand here to tell you how far we have come on that journey. Out of every 100 people on this planet, nearly 3 live in Bangladesh. But our story is not important because of our numbers, nor because of our geopolitical location. Our story matters because it is a reminder of the extraordinary power of ordinary people. It matters because it inspires hope among nations everywhere that no matter how deep the crisis, no matter how impossible the solution may seem, the path to renewal is never lost. Madam President, Bangladesh was born in 1971 through a bloody struggle for equality, for human dignity, and for social justice. Yet the very rights for which we shed blood so much, the very freedoms for which we sacrificed so much, have been denied again and again over the past 5 decades. Time and again, spearheaded by our youth, the people of Bangladesh have risen, endured sacrifice, and reclaimed those rights. This year, we mark the first anniversary of the July uprising. It was our youth who stood up. It was our youth who defeated tyranny. And it was our youth who opened the path to a new journey of building a just and equal society. The responsibility to carry that vision forward was placed on my shoulders and those of my colleagues. Rebuilding a devastated economy and state demanded nothing less than profound institutional reforms. We could have chosen the easy path, reforms imposed by executive order. But we chose the hard path, reforms built through inclusion and sustained through consensus. We chose the path that endures. Our goal is clear: to create a democratic order where power is balanced, where no autocrat can ever return, where no elected leader can destroy democracy, and where those who are meant to protect the people can never again prey upon them. To realize this vision, we established 11 independent commissions on governance, judiciary, elections, public administration, law enforcement, anti-corruption, women's rights, and other vital areas. These commissions consulted citizens, studied deeply, and produced detailed proposals for reform. To anchor these reforms in permanence, we created a National Consensus Commission, which brought together more than 30 political parties and coalitions. Its aim was simple yet historic: to forge a collective pledge that transcends party line. That effort succeeded. On the first anniversary of July uprising, we stood together on one stage and announced the July Declaration, a time-bound commitment to reform. That commitment means that no matter who wins the next election, the reform process will not stop, will not reverse, and will not be undone. Now, as we prepare for next elections in February next year, we remain steadfast in carrying forward reforms that place citizens at the center. Our focus is unchanging: transparency, accountability, and the rule of law. Madam President, within weeks of assuming office last year, I invited the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights to Bangladesh. The task was clear: to investigate and document human rights violations and atrocities committed by the fallen autocracy. Their team carried out field investigations and submitted a detailed report. Along with their findings, they made important recommendations to ensure that such crimes are never repeated. We have incorporated those recommendations into our national reform process. Even before the last General Assembly session, Bangladesh acceded to the International Convention for Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. We are now drafting necessary legislation to give full effect to its provisions at the national level. This year, we joined the optional protocol to Convention Against Torture, and we are working to establish an independent national mechanism to prevent torture in line with its requirements. To strengthen our transformation from a repressive authoritarian system into a democratic order that protects human rights, we have also authorized a 3-year mission of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Bangladesh. This mission has already begun its work, providing technical support to help us build strong and lasting safeguards. All these steps and commitments reflect the aspirations of our people, and those aspirations are clear: to build a democratic, inclusive, and pluralistic society. Madam President, at the heart of our development strategy lie 3 guiding principles: good governance, social inclusion, and sustainable development. From the bitter lessons of the past decade and a half, we know this truth: without accountability, development is temporary. Without accountability, development is fragile. Infrastructure projects driven by corruption and narrow political interests not only burden the economy, they fail to serve the people. When we assumed responsibility, we uncovered the vast scale of corruption and theft of public resources, and the severe economic vulnerability it had created. We are determined to put an end to this, so that development is never again used as an excuse to plunder the wealth of the people. To stabilize the fragile economy, we have taken difficult but necessary reform decisions. Among the most important reform is the revenue collection system. For the first time, legislation has been enacted to separate policy-making body from the implementing authority. This ensures transparency and accountability, and it will expand our revenue base. These measures are fully aligned with the severe commitment adopted at the recent FFD4 conference. Just as Bangladesh is striving to implement reforms in line with the severe commitment, we hope that the developed world will also honor their responsibilities under that collective pledge. We also believe that reform of decision-making and governance in global financial institutions is urgently needed. Equally vital are an inclusive framework for international tax cooperation, coordinated global measures against illicit financial flows and corruption, and stronger international cooperation for the recovery of stolen and illicit assets. Madam President, recovering the illicit assets stolen from our country is now one of our highest priorities. In the past 15 years, billions of dollars were siphoned abroad through corruption. We are working tirelessly to bring this wealth back. Yet, legal processes in the concerned countries and different other obstacles are hurting our efforts. Without sincere political commitment from the countries concerned, we will not be able to recover these assets. The current global financial system has failed to prevent the illicit transfer of resources from developing nations. In some cases, the very rules of international financial institutions have enabled the movement of vast sums of illegal money into tax havens around the world. I call upon those countries and institutions that shelter such stolen assets, do not be complicit in this crime. Return the wealth to its rightful owners, the farmers, the workers, and the ordinary taxpayers. I propose the adoption and enforcement of strong international regulations to prevent the plunder of resources from developing countries and to ensure their return when stolen. Madam President, alongside historic reforms in revenue, we have introduced a market-based exchange rate, brought discipline and stability to the banking sector through asset quality reviews, a new bank resolution ordinance, and a forthcoming deposit protection ordinance. We have modernized capital market oversight with a reformed task force and a strengthened investigative system. In public procurement, e-tendering is now mandatory and conflicts of interest must be disclosed. A new public accounts audit ordinance has reinforced accountability. Our aim is not only financial stability, but also an investment-friendly environment. The Bangladesh single window now integrates 19 agencies to simplify customs procedures. Specialized commercial courts have been established to expedite dispute resolution. The Investment Development Authority has set up a coordination committee to ensure smooth, one-stop services, bringing regulators under one roof and easing visa and work permit processes. An FDI heat map and a National Semiconductor Task Force now provide transparent information on high potential sectors. Trade logistics are also improving. Year on year, container handling at Chattogram port grew by 27.6% in August, a striking sign of new efficiency. These initiatives strengthen economic governance and make investment safer. Bangladesh is now entering a new phase of sustainable and inclusive growth. This progress would not have been possible without the extraordinary contribution of our migrant workers. Month after month, they send record remittances home through their hard work abroad. Their contribution is not only vital for Bangladesh, it is equally valuable for host countries, where they provide essential services in high demand. Migration is therefore mutually beneficial, good for us, good for them. We are also advancing human labor rights reforms in line with our commitments. A committee has already been formed to implement the recommendations of the Independent Labor Reform Commission. Amendments to the Bangladesh Labour Act are at the final stage, including easier trade union registration, longer maternity leave, and expanded social protection for workers in both formal and informal sectors. Online trade union registration has been introduced, and further simplification is under review. As a sign of our commitment to workers' rights, we have also signed the Charter of the OIC Labour Center. For these reasons, we strongly support safe, orderly, and regular migration. We call upon all countries that receive migrant workers to ensure empathy and protection for them. While developed nations struggle with aging populations, Bangladesh is blessed. More than 60% of our people are under the age of 35. If migration pathways are opened, it will be mutually beneficial. By harnessing the strength of our youth, we can help meet labor needs in developed countries while creating opportunities for our own people. Madam President, the young generation of Bangladesh has already shown that they are the driving force of social change. We are investing in their skills in information technology, artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and green innovation. Our goal is clear: to shape every young person not only as a job seeker but also as a job creator. To this end, in partnership with the UN, we are launching a permanent platform to connect young people at the grassroots with senior policymakers of the government. Across the country, consultations have already begun. Today's youth want to be directly connected to their representatives from the local to the national level through online and offline forums, surveys, and campaigns. They demand greater opportunities for leadership, skills development, and digital literacy. They call for accountability in this process with regular progress reports and continuous dialogue. Above all, they insist that the process be inclusive with equal space for women, minorities, persons with disabilities, and marginalized groups. This year is especially significant for youth policy as we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the World Programme of Action for Youth. It is not only a moment to address the challenges of today's young people, but also to anticipate the crisis they will face tomorrow and to begin shaping the solutions. In this fast-changing technological era, one of our deepest concerns is the widening digital divide facing youth in developing world. Quantum computing, artificial intelligence, large language models, modern communication systems, these must not be biased, and their benefits must be shared fairly with all. If not, we risk creating an entire generation who will see themselves as excluded, marginalized, and treated unjustly. Such a generation will be vulnerable to every harmful temptation. We believe that to shield young people from this risk and to spread the benefits of technology to all, technological innovation alone is not enough. We also need social innovation. Almost half a century ago, we introduced the idea of microcredit. It was then a radical experiment against conventional wisdom. Today, it is a globally recognized tool that has lifted millions out of poverty. In the US, for example, Grameen America has disbursed more than $6.2 billion till date to low-income women entrepreneurs with repayment rates close to 100%. Today, in Bangladesh and across the world, we are advancing the idea of social business. It is a form of business where profits are entirely reinvested for social good. Social business has shown that the entrepreneurial spirit of every human being can be harnessed for the welfare of society and the solving of social problems. This gives humanity a creative method to address every challenge, whether environmental degradation, concentration of wealth, healthcare, unemployment, or poverty. It is a path that can be applied and sustained everywhere. Madam President, in confronting the climate crisis, the goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius has already slipped beyond our grasp. The annual pledge of $100 billion in climate finance has not been met. Worse still, The small sums that are dispersed are often shown on paper as many times larger than what they really are. This is unacceptable. For the sake of our children's future, we must act now. The Loss and Damage Fund must be made fully operational. Efforts to mitigate climate change must be intensified, but adaptation must be given equal priority. And adaptation must be locally determined, locally led, and locally managed. Bangladesh has already embraced locally led adaptation as a guiding principle. At the upcoming COP30 conference, we will announce our third nationally determined contributions, which will include both mitigation targets and adaptation actions, with special emphasis on protecting mangrove forests and restoring wetlands. At the same time, we expect the global community, particularly the high-emitting countries, to meet their responsibilities with sincerity. Madam President, another great challenge of our time is the rise of protectionism in global trade. In our own lifetimes, we have seen how trade and globalization lifted almost 1 billion people out of poverty in just 3 decades. If we now turn back, our children will lose that opportunity. It is undeniable that in trade, every nation's sovereign interests must be safeguarded, and no country should be forced to bear burdens beyond its capacity. But for the sake of global peace and prosperity, there is no alternative to open, fair, and rules-based trade. We must also expand the role of social business in global trade. A growing share of development assistance must be directed towards spreading social business worldwide. My generation has witnessed how a system of interdependent economies made conflict too costly and helped preserve peace. Today, more than 120 armed conflicts are raging across the globe. If economic interdependence collapses, these conflicts will only multiply, development will falter, and peace itself will be destroyed. Madam President, the ongoing conflict in our neighboring country Myanmar has created a situation of deep concern for the entire region. It threatens not only regional stability, but also the prospects for the safe return of the forcibly displaced Rohingya sheltered in Bangladesh. 8 years on, the Rohingya crisis continues without any solution in sight. Moreover, Bangladesh faces a slow but regular flow of the Rohingyas seeking protection. Evidently, deprivation of rights and persecution of the Rohingya rooted in cultural identity-based politics continue in Rakhine. Reversal of the process of marginalization of the Rohingya cannot wait any further. Most of the discriminatory policies and practices that made them vulnerable can be reversed, and remedial measures can be advanced without waiting for a comprehensive national political settlement in Myanmar. There must be a political solution to the problems in Rakhine involving the ethnic stakeholders there so that the Rohingya become part of the Rakhine society with equal rights as equal citizens. Towards this end, a sustainable repatriation in safety and security must lead the process for restoration of their rights and their ultimate reintegration with dignity. Bangladesh has been drawn into this crisis as the second victim after the persecuted Rohingya. Yet, we must remember that the Rohingya crisis is not a bilateral issue with Myanmar. Bangladesh has been realizing its part of obligation as a responsible neighbor and a committed member of the international community. But our collective goal of maintaining a minimum standard of living in the camps face a situation of potential collapse given the funding crunch. The World Food Programme warns of a critical funding shortfall for its emergency response. Without urgent new funding, monthly ration may have to be halved to a paltry $6 per person pushing the Rohingya deeper into hunger, accentuating their malnutrition, and forcing them to resort to desperate measures. Further cuts will no doubt intensify protection and security risks, transcending much beyond the camps. Hence, I call upon existing donors and to come forward with enhanced contribution and potential donors to make announcements of generous contribution to prevent this catastrophic situation. The international community, beyond new and enhanced funding for humanitarian assistance, must apply pressure on Myanmar or the non-state actor in Rakhine to bring positive changes there and to seek political solutions urgently. The neighboring countries must assume their responsibilities. Bangladesh will remain available for any assistance or contribution needed towards stabilization of Rakhine that the international community collectively agrees. Bangladesh expects that the upcoming high-level conference on 30 September will galvanize global resolve and generate concrete international support for the Rohingya, with the topmost priority of diversified and additional funding. Parallelly, it must agree on a process with time-bound deliverables as part of a globally accepted roadmap towards seeking permanent solutions to the Rohingya crisis. Madam President, this year, conflicts have scarred almost every corner of the globe, in Europe, in South Asia, and in the Middle East. We live in the most densely populated region of the world. Nowhere else do so many nuclear-armed states exist in such close proximity. That is why we in Bangladesh deeply understand the urgency of disarmament and the prevention of nuclear proliferation. We call for the revival of global arms control treaties that have grown weaker with time. We renew our call for the establishment of nuclear weapon-free zones, particularly in the Middle East and South Asia. At the same time, we reaffirm the right of every nation to use nuclear energy peacefully, with full transparency. As a responsible nation, even before commissioning our first nuclear power plant, Bangladesh this year acceded to the Joint Convention on the Safety of Spent Fuel Management and on the Safety of Radioactive Waste Management under the IAEA. By doing so, we reaffirm our commitment to the highest standards of nuclear safety and transparency. Madam President, I have always spoken the language of hope. I have never believed in frightening people into action, but today I must depart from that habit, for the truth before us is frightening. I must warn, extreme nationalism, geopolitics that thrive on suffering of others, and indifference to human pain are destroying the progress humanity has built through decades of struggle. Nowhere is this tragedy more visible than in Gaza. Children are dying of hunger, civilians are being killed without distinction. Entire neighborhoods, including hospitals and schools, are being wiped from the map. We do agree with the UN Independent International Inquiry Commission that we are witnessing a genocide happening live. Unfortunately, on behalf of the humanity, we are not doing enough to stop it. If this continues, neither future generations nor history will forgive us. On behalf of the people of Bangladesh and of conscientious citizens across the world, I once again make a strong appeal. The two-state solution must be implemented now through the establishment of an independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. Only on the basis of the pre-1967 borders, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace, can justice be done. Madam President, in Bangladesh, we believe that we must build a culture of peace, one that rests on the values of tolerance, non-violence, dialogue, and cooperation at every level of society. For more than 3.5 decades, Bangladesh has stood among the leading contributors of UN peacekeepers. This is living proof of our enduring commitment to global peace and security. Even today, nearly 6,000 Bangladeshi peacekeepers are serving in some of the world's most volatile regions under the UN flag, and 168 of our peacekeepers have made the ultimate sacrifice in line of duty. Research has consistently shown that UN peacekeeping missions are more sustainable and effective than unilateral interventions. We therefore call for clear and achievable mandates and adequate funding for peacekeeping operations. We must also give the highest priority to the safety of peacekeepers and ensure accountability for crimes committed against them. Bangladesh also actively promotes multilingualism, both at home and internationally, because we believe that linguistic and cultural diversity deepens mutual understanding. In the 21st century, there is no place for hatred, intolerance, racism, xenophobia, or Islamophobia in any society. Yet today, disinformation and hate speech have become matters of grave concern. In the aftermath of the last year's popular uprising in Bangladesh, certain vested groups deliberately spread false narratives, and such disinformation continues even now. The problem has been compounded by the deliberate use of fake news and artificial intelligence-driven deepfakes, which make the situation even more dangerous. We must work together to confront these distortions before they erode trust among people and weaken the bonds of social harmony. Madam President, one of our top priorities is the empowerment of women. In the words of our national poet Qazi Nazrul Islam, whatever in this world is great, whatever is good and everlasting, half of it has been created by women and the other half by men. In reality, in many important fields today, the contribution of women is greater than half. This month, for the first time, Bangladesh published the Unpaid Household Production Satellite Account. It shows that women perform more than 85% of unpaid care and household work, with a value equivalent to over 16% of our GDP. Despite many obstacles, our girls are succeeding everywhere, from classrooms to boardrooms, from laboratories to sports fields. Recently, our women's football team won a regional championship, qualified for the Inter-Asian competition, and inspired millions across the country. My government's efforts to ensure women's safety, dignity, and equal opportunity continue. This year, we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. On this occasion, we have strengthened our commitment to women's empowerment by announcing 4 national pledges under the Beijing Plus 30 Action Agenda to be implemented in the next 5 years. They include enacting a law to prevent and protect against sexual harassment, recognizing and valuing women's unpaid care and household work, increasing women's participation in politics and public life, and strengthening gender-responsive budgeting. Madam President, Bangladesh is committed to regional cooperation based on mutual respect, transparency, and shared prosperity. Through initiatives such as BIMSTEC, BBIN, Asian Highway, SASEC, we are advancing regional connectivity and trade. At the same time, we have expressed interest in joining effective regional forums like ASEAN, and we are working toward that goal. We also call for the revitalization of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC. Established 4 decades ago, SAARC achieved notable progress in its early years and laid a strong foundation for regional cooperation. Despite political deadlock, its institutional structure remains intact. We believe SAARC still holds the potential to deliver welfare to the hundreds of millions in our region, just as ASEAN has done in its own. For shared development, there is no alternative to regional cooperation among neighbors. And when it comes to the use of shared natural resources, fairness and compassion must guide us. Bangladesh is firmly committed to peaceful regional cooperation in this area. That is why, as the first country in South Asia, we have recently joined the UN Water Convention. Madam President, centuries of political exploitation, plunder of resources, and structural inequalities have created today's stark realities of uneven development. A decade ago, when we agreed on the 2030 agenda, we were filled with hope that the world would change course and move toward the right path. Yet the reality today is sobering. Progress toward the SDGs has fallen dangerously behind. The gap in development financing continues to grow, while the flow of official development assistance is shrinking. We urge donor countries to reverse this trend and to honor their commitments. We are in the process of graduating from the category of least developed countries to that of developing countries. Enhanced cooperation from the international community, in particular the relevant entities of the UN, is essential to ensure a smooth and sustainable transition. In this regard, we commend the work of OHRLLS and other relevant UN entities. We call for further strengthening of this office to enable more effective support to the LDCs and other vulnerable countries. At the same time, alongside grants and loans, we call for a massive expansion of social business through both public and private initiatives. This new approach can bring benefit to both donor and recipient countries alike. It can inspire, it can encourage, and it can take human creativity to new heights. Madam President, we acknowledge the contribution of UN to Bangladesh's progress and development. We reaffirm our full confidence in its 3 pillars: peace and security, development, and human rights. At the beginning of my statement, I said that over the past 8 decades, the UN has shown time and again that multilateral diplomacy helps humanity live together in greater harmony. Yet, on its 80th anniversary, we must acknowledge that multilateral diplomacy is under strain. The tensions of unequal bilateral relations have once again proved that multilateralism remains our last and best resort. To keep the UN, the custodian of multilateralism, alive and vibrant, we call for full transparency and sincere dialogue among member states. The United Nations must continue to evolve and adapt if it is to meet today's challenges and fulfill our collective aspiration for multilateralism. In this spirit, we welcome the Secretary General's UN 80 initiative, but we must also insist reform must not weaken multilateralism or silence the voices of developing countries. Reform must have one goal only: to bring about real and positive change on the ground. Madam President, last year our people proved that injustice in this world is not eternal. They proved that change is not only possible, it is inevitable. We must remember that the challenges ahead cannot be met by any single country alone. And we must also remember that in today's world, where one nation falls into crisis, when crisis erupts in one corner of the globe, the security of the whole world is put at risk. We must move forward with the dream of building a world of 3 zeros. Our young generation will grow as the soldiers of that dream. Before them will stand three goals: zero carbon, zero wealth concentration, and zero unemployment. On this foundation, they will build their world. Let the dream of a 3-0 world be the dream of all nations united in this assembly. With this hope, I conclude my statement. I thank you all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Chief Advisor of the Interim Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Robert Blair, Prime Minister of Republic of Malta. I request protocol to please escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and dear friends, we are gathered here just a few weeks shy of the 80th anniversary of the foundation of this United Nations. Unfortunately, even a glance at the global headlines is enough to produce the depressing thought that perhaps it should be less of a birthday party and more of a wake-up call. But firstly and firmly, I want to reject the idea that the need for the United Nations is any less imperative today than it was 8 decades ago. Then, as now, you could be forgiven for losing hope. In 1945, at the end of that global conflict, the world seemed to be in ruins. Thankfully, in 2025, our world isn't in ruins, but too much of it is in flames. 80 years ago, the leaders owed it to the millions who had lost their lives over 6 years of slaughter to never lose hope. So do we, as leaders of today, owe it to every citizen that we serve to similarly never lose hope, to never lose sight of the founding principles that brought the countries of the world together, to never allow that which divides us to obscure the much greater values that unite us, to never give in to pessimism or cynicism about what the future can hold. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not blind to the magnitude of the challenges that our world faces. I know that fine words here in New York won't, by themselves, end conflict, hunger, or deaths by malnutrition. But I remain convinced that the resolution we show and the resolutions we pass here can make a real and tangible difference on the ground. We must never lose sight of the power of collective will and that of collective action. Because while the 8 decades of the United Nations have seen far too much conflict and suffering, they have also seen human progress on a scale even the most optimistic of the founding fathers, who dared to dream that working together could work to transform the lives of ordinary people, would never have imagined themselves. Let me cite just one example. In 1945, global life expectancy, war aside, was in the mid-40s. Children born this year, in 2025, can expect to live in their mid-70s. Now, that didn't happen by luck or by accident. It happened by will and resolve. It happened by effort. And it happened also because of the positive work being conducted by the agencies of this United Nations. And it is not just in terms of life chances that the United Nations has had a positive, transformative impact. The values inscribed in the founding charter had a profound effect on the journey to self-determination of so many nations, like my own, Malta. In 1945, Malta was still a colony, a British military and naval base. In 2025, Malta is a proud republic since 1974 and independent since 1964, playing its part at the pivotal crossroads of two continents. So, the country I am honored to lead will never turn its back on the possibilities that the principles of our United Nations offer to deliver solutions to even the gravest of challenges. Perhaps the gravest of those challenges that the world faces is division. Barriers are being built when they should be coming down and dismantled. And those barriers really are already proving obstacles to the exchange of trade, innovation, ideas, of hope that our world needs. In thinking about this throwing up of barriers, I thought of some words of the late US President, Ronald Reagan. In his 1985 State of the Union address, he had said, "There are no constraints on the human mind, no walls around the human spirit, no barriers to our progress except those we ourselves erect." And who can forget the four simple words which changed the course of history that President Reagan himself delivered 2 years later when he stood in front of the Berlin Wall and dared to say directly to the Soviet leader, Mr. Gorbachev, "Tear down this wall." So I say to each and every one of my fellow leaders, let us tear down the walls together. Let us dare to say the seemingly unsayable. Let us dare to achieve the seemingly unachievable. Let us dare to make the changes needed, no matter how seemingly overwhelming the odds. We must not be afraid also to make those changes closest to home in the very way this United Nations works. The biggest threat to the future of our United Nations doesn't come from those who want to tear it down, but it comes from those who say that in the face of that pressure, we should barricade ourselves in and reject the idea of change and reforms. It comes also from those who say that to admit imperfections and weaknesses in the way that we work is to give comfort to those who decry and belittle the very idea of the United Nations. That couldn't be more wrong. What empowers the opponents is a hint of an organization with its head buried in sand. A bunker, a fortress mentality would be fatal. The status quo simply isn't an option. We need to deliver a United Nations that is smarter and, of course, fairer. And we need to accelerate the pace of change to do just that. The change has also to begin at the top. I want to take this occasion to pay tribute to the Secretary General and his unwavering commitment and dedication to the cause of peace. Thank you, Antonio. But no one can say that the big power horse trading that has marked every single election of a Secretary General has been an edifying sight. We often reach the right outcome, and that is good and positive, but we certainly go the wrong way about it. We need to do better. The process to find a worthy successor to Secretary General Guterres must be a step change in the way that we work. The selection process must be transparent, inclusive, and based on merit, not political bargaining. The decision must be taken out of the corridors of this building and become a truly global conversation involving all member states, as well as civil society. As for the Security Council, its makeup reflects the world as it was in 1945, and not as it is in 2025. Malta backs the clamor for expansion and fairer regional representation. But it isn't just the composition that needs to change. The role of the Security Council needs to be elevated. It must serve as a greater counterbalance to the dominance of the larger powers. It must also be a genuine platform for all the nations of the world to have our voices heard. And change needs to come not just to political structures, but to the way the United Nations works. All around the world, including in Malta, my country, citizens are rightly pressing governments to do more with less, better value for money. The United Nations, like any other publicly funded organization, needs to make sure that it ruthlessly focuses not on protecting the way things are not done now, but on the way things can be done differently to deliver better outcomes for the same investment. No area of the United Nations can remain untouched. No vested interest left untackled. The United Nations must embrace digital diplomacy for the artificial intelligence age. Every system must be streamlined, every process scrutinized to ensure it delivers for the front line. Every program assessed against its actual impact. We shouldn't be afraid to ensure that the United Nations stops doing things it does badly and starts doing those things it does well, even better and even more efficiently. Too often, global relations, like much of life, can seem merely a numbers game. Of course, the biggest states will always have the loudest voices, and that is understandable. But there can be no doubt that small states and developing countries are often underrepresented and underheard when key decisions are taken and made. Unless our unique experiences are taken into account and our needs, we won't put in place solutions that can actually deliver across the whole world. It is a self-defeating mistake for the big boys club to crowd out the added value that small nations can bring to the table. We bring innovation, credibility, and moral authority to any concerted global action. To exclude the small is to damage the big. We all lose, which is why, although Malta may be one of the United Nations' smallest members in terms of geography, we have always been determined to be one of the UN's biggest voices. Malta remains as committed to the goals of peace, dialogue, diplomacy, and global cooperation as we were on that day in 1964 when we took our seat for the first time in this United Nations. As we've grown as a nation, found our feet on the European and world stage, and developed a fast-growing economy, so too have we found our role in the work of the UN. Small nations, like ours, have to be realistic about how we can add value. But I firmly believe that Malta has a combination of two major factors that makes our country an asset to the global conversation. Firstly, Malta has a deep commitment to the power of multilateral engagement. We bring to the table the recent experience of both chairing the OSCE and serving on the UN Security Council, alongside the insight gained from our current presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. I am particularly proud that Malta's presidency coincides with the 75th anniversary of the European Convention on Human Rights, rising, like the United Nations, from the ashes of the Second World War, guaranteeing for hundreds of millions of Europeans and other peoples the fundamental human rights for which so many people lost their lives in their fight for them. Secondly, Malta offers a unique platform for peace. We offer a unique mix that leaves Malta particularly well placed to host dialogue and discussions between parties, between countries, no matter how far apart they are. Our geography at the crossroads of two continents, our neutrality enshrined in our constitution, our diplomatic tradition as a respected and knowledgeable fair broker. Together, they make Malta the ideal location to come together to try and find solutions to even the most intractable of disputes. So, today, I renew my open offer to the warring parties of the world and those working to bridge those divides. Malta stands ready to welcome you, to facilitate and to support you in finding ways forward. Now, nobody disputes how deeply entrenched are the barriers to peace, but that doesn't mean that the search for solutions should ever be paused. Thinking back and going back to President Reagan when he dared to call for the walls, physical and political, that were dividing Europe to be torn down, many had dismissed it as an impossible dream, unrealistic, never going to happen. But it did. The seemingly intractable Cold War came to an end. As global leaders, we must equally never give up. Never say peace can't be achieved. Never give in to defeatism, even the most outwardly unresolvable of conflicts. Sadly, on Malta's doorsteps, two such conflicts, wars, are raging: Ukraine and Gaza. The world must not turn its back on either, or tackle them with double standards, as this would undermine our credibility and effectiveness. We must never wring our hands and consign any conflict to the too difficult to deal with pile. It is now 3.5 years since Russia's unprovoked and illegal invasion of Ukraine. Malta remains resolute now as it was then in demanding a lasting and just peace that guarantees Ukraine's sovereignty. This is the only solution which will adhere to the spirit of both the UN Charter and international law. But that can only come about following a full and unconditional permanent ceasefire and the full participation of Ukraine in any future peace talks and decision-taking. Malta stands firmly with our fellow EU members in believing that we must keep the strongest possible pressure on the Russian economy to force the Russian government to see sense and engage in genuine and constructive dialogue. Slava Ukraini. So too must there be an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The suffering of so many thousands of innocent civilians must come to an end now. It must come to an end now. Yes, the remaining hostages must be released immediately by Hamas. International humanitarian aid must be allowed to flow in Gaza without impediment. It is so morally wrong and inhuman that so many innocent people are dying of hunger and severe malnutrition. These atrocities must stop now. We cannot allow the further killing of thousands of innocent people, babies, children, youth, the elderly and the frail to continue and turn our heads the other way because of improper considerations. We cannot remain silent. Decisive and effective action needs to be taken without any further delay. I cannot bear to see anymore the physical and psychological pain and suffering in the eyes of the young children we bring over to Malta from Gaza to give them a better future. Children, young children with mutilated bodies who are supposed to be celebrating the innocence of their youth and the best period of their lives. The parents who have lost their young children. And I ask, why? When leadership should be about humanity and empathy, and not about who can inflict maximum damage to win a war or wipe out a nation or its people. I was proud this week to stand with other world leaders and add Malta to the growing list of allies recognizing Palestinian statehood. After tens of years of discussion in Malta, we took decisive action and did the right thing to do. I owe this to Ibrahim, a 15-year-old icon of the resilience and strength of the Palestinian people. Ibrahim is now receiving the best medical care and prosthetics in Malta after having both his legs blown off and severely injured by a missile fired from a drone in Gaza. His friends were killed in the same accident. These are the daily realities in Gaza, and we have to stand up and be counted. Not doing so would mean that we are complicit in what is happening. Now, a viable two-state solution, no, isn't a reward for Hamas. It is the exact opposite. It is the only way, in actual fact, to finally banish evil of Hamas. It is the only solution that can deliver the sustainable and peaceful future that both peoples wish for and deserve. Of course, the road to a fair two-state solution is a long one, fraught with difficulties. But just because something is hard doesn't mean it is impossible. The world owes to Israelis and Palestinians alike to pursue this path to peace. Indeed, the world faces a stark choice. In too many areas of life, too many barriers are being erected. When too many countries pull up the shutters and turn in on themselves, it is small island nations like Malta that pay the highest price and take the biggest hit. Let me be clear, security is the first duty of any government. Being against barriers doesn't equal being against sensible safeguards. Every nation has the right to take necessary steps to protect itself, but isolation doesn't make anyone safer, because as all the evidence of history shows, the greater the cooperation across borders, the greater the protection we can afford to our citizens. And a threat to global prosperity is a threat to global security. So, I urge the United Nations to redouble its efforts to safeguard the connectivity that trading nations like Malta have to rely on. It is incumbent on all of us to resist the trend to protectionism and fight for open markets. The alternative of a world of trade barriers will only make us all poorer. Of course, it is equally important that we work to tackle the downsides of globalization to ensure that none of our citizens are left behind. But there can be no turning back of the clock. We can secure our borders without building fortresses. Addressing legitimate concerns about migration is not the same as pulling up the drawbridge. Clearly, the current growth of irregular migration is not sustainable. Yet, it will only be truly addressed by a truly global solution and response. A coordinated response that is both humane and sustainable, that acknowledges the fundamental truth that migration is driven by poverty and conflict, driving migrants to risk their lives at the mercy of criminal human smugglers in search of a better future for themselves and their families. Every country has a right to secure its borders, but every country equally has a duty to play its part in tackling the root causes of irregular migration. You might say, tough on irregular migration, tough on the root causes of irregular migration. Underpinning all this is the need for every member of this United Nations to recommit to the primacy of international law and the value of international cooperation. No country, however large, however strategically important, is above the rule of law. Might does not automatically equal right. Small states like Malta cannot afford the risks of a world where some ignore the laws when it suits them. Upholding the charter upon which this United Nations was born 8 decades ago isn't wide-eyed idealism. For nations like Malta, it is about our very survival, equally vital. For the survival of small island nation states is the absolute necessity of stemming down the impact of man-made climate change. It would be too easy for a world waylaid by war, to shrug its shoulders and claim it lacks the bandwidth to keep taking the actions needed to keep down the Earth's temperature. Malta, however, will keep working to amplify the voices of the small islands across the globe. As a small island state, we are at the front line of rising temperatures and rising sea levels. This isn't some theoretical threat. It is a challenge to our very existence. So Malta will continue to support indices like Corvi that bring home just how vulnerable small island states are to climate change. And we will maintain pressure for greater support to be given to those developing small island states where the threat is highest and fastest. But the cost of preparedness and adaptation is disproportionately high. They must be given the resources that they need to adapt. And the adaptation must not cause a financial burden on their citizens, to our citizens. Otherwise, we will lose their buy-in. And whilst reaching our climatic targets should, of course, not be put on the back burner, the competitiveness of our economies must also not be put on the back burner in the pursuit of those targets. Otherwise, we will miss the wood for the trees. Dear friends, let me conclude my remarks from where I began today. Yes, our world faces unprecedented challenges. In an age of instant communications, we are all exposed to the threats we all face like never before. They can seem utterly overwhelming. But as a world, we face two choices. We can give up hope, give up trying, or we can double down, step in and step up and never give up. Multilateralism is more important today than it was even in 1945. We won't keep our people safe, our planet protected, or our prosperity preserved unless we work together, listen to each other, and act in concert. So I say to my fellow leaders of all states, of all sizes, tear down these walls. Let us stop erecting new barriers. Let us knock down those existing walls, physical and metaphorical, that are standing in the way of progress. No more posturing, a lot more partnership. We owe it to those who had the vision 80 years ago. We owe it to the people who put their trust in us to lead them. United Nations isn't perfect, but it is indispensable. So let us commit loud and clear to making it better focused, better value, better at tackling the challenges of the next 80 years. And let that commitment start today. Thank you all.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Malta. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Kyriakos Mitsotakis, Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madame la Présidente, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address this assembly for the 7th time as Prime Minister of Greece. And as many other speakers have pointed out, this year carries a special weight as we celebrate the 80th anniversary of this United Nations. 80 years of hope, of struggle, of progress. And this milestone coincides with a very important moment for Greece, our 3rd tenure as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. And we accept this responsibility with honor and with a deep sense of duty as a nation that stood at the birth of this organization. And like so many other nations, my country came here devastated by the horrors of the Second World War. The Charter of the United Nations was not just a legal document, it was a commitment that never again should force prevail over the rule of law. And for 8 decades, the United Nations has defended peace, has advanced human rights, has expanded access to health, education, and equality for all. It has stood as a custodian of international law, safeguarding the rules and principles that make international cooperation possible. The United Nations was at the epicenter of a historic turning point. It gave voice to the hopes of people long denied freedom. Decolonization brought new nations into this assembly, and they brought with them their histories, their culture, their aspirations. And their participation helped redress historical injustices and transform the organization into a true reflection of the world's diversity. These achievements are real progress. They have made our world safer, fairer, and more prosperous, but they should never, never be taken for granted. They were won through effort and sacrifice, and they remain fragile. Ladies and gentlemen, a new global order is on the rise. Multilateralism is under strain, and fundamental tenets of the post-1945 world are being questioned. We witness attempts to revive the imperial ambitions of previous centuries. Revisionist narratives are resurging. And some leaders, unfortunately, remain trapped in the past, chasing illusions of a bygone glory. Might over right risks once again becoming the norm in international relations. A norm the international community has sought to overcome for more than 80 years. And this trend is strengthening at a time when global challenges continue to multiply. Climate change, migration, the advent of artificial intelligence. Our world is changing. We must meet this change with courage and responsibility, but never, never at the expense of the principles that form the very fabric of the international community represented in this assembly. Most important of them being respect for territorial integrity and the peaceful resolution of disputes. Being situated at the crossroads of 3 continents, Greece is a pillar of stability and a reliable partner in a turbulent region. We uphold the principles of international law. We seek dialogue and peaceful coexistence with our neighbors. Some claim that these principles are irrelevant in today's world. We believe the opposite. They are the source of strength, the only path to lasting peace. And we are certainly not naive. We remain fully aware of the threats and the risks of instability in our wider neighborhood. This is why we're strengthening our economy, enhancing our deterrence capabilities, and deepening our alliances, so that we stand ready to defend and uphold our values. For us, this is not just words. Greece is already allocating more than 3% of its GDP to defense, and we're ready to do more. Security is the very foundation of prosperity. After all, our paramount obligation as leaders is to keep our people safe. And we do this not in isolation. We are firmly anchored in the European Union, the most successful multilateral project of our age. It's born from the ashes of the Second World War. The European Union has secured peace and prosperity in Europe for generations. But today we must go further. And in the European Union, we are determined to take on a stronger role in our own defense. With war returning to our continent, I'm afraid there is simply no other option. Greece has long and consistently advocated for strengthening the European Union's strategic autonomy. We firmly believe that the time has come for joint European borrowing to finance critical European defense projects, such as missile and drone defense. And beyond that, it is imperative that we make Article 42, paragraph 7, which enshrines into European law the mutual assistance clause, truly operational. One of the founders of the European Union, Jean Monnet, famously once said that Europe was forged in crisis and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises. He was right. What started as a project of economic cooperation needs to evolve into a union that safeguards our citizens' security and safety. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're witnessing the highest number of armed conflicts since the end of the Second World War. These are conflicts that claim tens of thousands of lives each year, conflicts that leave behind mass destruction, shattered societies, and conflicts that have displaced millions. And the prospects, if we fail to act, are even grimmer. A future of escalating violence and deepening instability. And nowhere is this urgency more evident than in Gaza. Greece has, from the very first day after the heinous attacks of October 7th, 2023, advocated for Israel's right to defend itself against a terrorist organization that rejects Israel's right to exist. We have called for the immediate release of all hostages and a comprehensive ceasefire. But we have, at the same time, made it very clear that no military targets, no matter how valuable they are, can justify the death of thousands of children, the forced displacement of over 1 million Palestinians within the Gaza Strip, and the humanitarian suffering of the Palestinian people. Greece maintains a strategic partnership with Israel, but this does not prevent us from speaking openly and frankly. The continuation of this course of action will ultimately harm Israel's own interests, leading to an erosion of international support. And I tell my Israeli friends that they risk alienating all the remaining allies if they persist on a path that is shattering the potential of a two-state solution. Greece will continue to advocate for a two-state solution which envisions the creation of a sovereign, democratic, and viable state of Palestine, building its future in peace and security alongside the state of Israel. But we should be lucid about the roadmap towards achieving this elusive goal. Israel's action in the West Bank risks creating irreversible situations on the ground. And at present, the most necessary is to stop the unnecessary killing and ensure a large-scale and sustainable delivery of humanitarian aid to Gaza. Greece remains committed to working with all our partners towards a roadmap that will achieve that goal and that will revive the peace process, that will offer hope to a region which has suffered so much. Ladies and gentlemen, the war in Ukraine is already in its 4th year. Ukraine's courageous resistance to Russia's aggression stands as a testimony of unparalleled bravery and remarkable resilience. The war in Ukraine is not just another regional European conflict. It's a fight for freedom, for democracy, for dignity itself. It's, above all, a defense of the rules-based global international order. We stand firmly and unconditionally with Ukraine in this struggle, and we will continue our unwavering support to the Ukrainian people who have the right to live in peace, in security, and freely determine their own future. And we appreciate President Trump's effort to reach peace, and we reiterate that the genuine peace process cannot begin without an immediate ceasefire. Let us be even clearer, there can be no peace formula without Ukraine at the table, and there can be no acceptance under any circumstances of borders redrawn by force. Gaza and Ukraine have monopolized the interests of this assembly, but another humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding, and unfortunately, it does not receive the attention it deserves. And I'm referring to Sudan. 2.5 years into a devastating war, civilians are paying the highest price. Millions are left without safety, dignity, or protection. And the figures are horrifying. Almost 12 million people have been forced from their homes, creating the world's largest displacement crisis. More than 30 million could require humanitarian aid. Famine is spreading. And civilians must be protected. Humanitarian aid must flow freely and without obstruction, and those responsible for atrocities and war crimes must be held into account. There's only one path forward: silence the guns and renew a coordinated political process. The world must not forget the people of Sudan. We owe them nothing less than peace and the chance of a future built on hope, not despair. And as Europeans, it is also in our interest to take an active role in resolving the Sudan crisis. Otherwise, we risk facing a migration crisis of unimaginable proportions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Eastern Mediterranean is an area of strategic importance. It's Europe's southeastern frontier, a vital crossroads of trade and energy routes. Greece, at the heart of this region, holds a key geostrategic position. And we aspire to become an energy security provider, linking Europe with North Africa and the Middle East. And by exercising our sovereign rights, always in full respect with international law, we are strengthening our footprint and shaping developments in the area. Connectivity projects, such as the Great Sea Interconnector and the Greki project that links Greece to Egypt, are projects of mutual benefit, advancing stability and ensuring that our electricity grids are better connected. They will diversify Europe's energy supply, accelerate the green transition, and above all, bring our region closer. Renewables are the future, and in Greece we have already made significant strides in this field. But we also remain pragmatic. Fossil fuels will continue to play a role in an energy mix, with natural gas serving as a bridge in this transition. And that is why we're investing in infrastructure that will make Greece an LNG hub, and at the same time, together with our American partners, we're advancing the exploration and potential exploitation of our offshore gas reserves, a resource of strategic value, not just for Greece, but also for Europe. Yet the Eastern Mediterranean also faces profound challenges: climate change, migration, persistent conflict. The only way to meet them is through cooperation built on leadership, political will, but also a shared sense of responsibility. In all our relations with our neighbors, Greece is guided by a single unwavering compass: respect for international law. This is a cornerstone of our foreign policy and the basis upon which we seek dialogue and genuine cooperation. Let me begin with our relations with Turkey. Greece seeks peaceful coexistence with our neighbor. And in recent years, yes, we have succeeded in maintaining low tensions. And this is a positive development that we should not underestimate. However, the calm seas we have witnessed over the past 2 years must not be fleeting. They must allow us to build trust, find common ground, and pursue solutions in the interests of both our people. The way forward lies in dialogue, in respect for international law, and in the vision of a region defined not by rivalry, but by shared prosperity. And as I've repeatedly stressed from this podium, we are ready to work towards settling the only major outstanding issue between us, the delimitation of the continental shelf and the exclusive economic zone in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey must remove the threat of war against Greece that still hangs as a dark cloud over our relations. After 30 years, this casus belli has to be revoked. It has no place in relations between friendly neighbors. Our path forward must be one of diplomacy, not the language of weapons. Let me say a few words about the Cyprus problem. For 51 years, Cyprus has endured the consequences of Turkey's illegal invasion and continued military occupation. It's a blatant violation of international law and a constant strain to regional peace and security. Our commitment to Cyprus's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and a solution of one state based on a bizonal, bicommunal federation is steadfast. It's a matter of credibility and determination to defend the core values and principles upon which the United Nations are based and fully aligned with all the decisions taken by the UN Security Council. And Greece fully supports the efforts of the Secretary General and his personal envoy to give a new impetus to the resumption of negotiations. And a just and viable settlement will serve the interests of the Cypriot people and contribute decisively to the stability of the wider region. Turning to Libya, our two countries share maritime borders. We are neighbors. It is therefore in our common interests to reach a fair and lawful delimitation agreement in line with the provisions of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The true stability in our neighborhood also depends on Libya itself being united and sovereign. The Libyan people must be free to determine their future without foreign interference, and Greece stands ready to assist constructively in the UN-led efforts to achieve a political solution and reunite the country. When it comes to Syria, after 14 years of bloodshed, last December brought a moment of change and a new hope for the Syrian people. The future of the country must be built on tolerance, dialogue, and full political representation for all religious and ethnic communities. Only then can Syria's diverse society find peace and prosperity, free from sectarian violence and external interference. I made it clear to the Syrian president that our support regarding Syria's rapprochement with Europe is conditional upon the protection of religious and ethnic communities, in particular, the Christian Orthodox minority, which has been repeatedly targeted by Muslim extremists. At the same time, we expect Syria and its authorities to act in full accordance with international law, including the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Finally, let me turn to the Western Balkans, our immediate neighbors, our strategic partners of the European Union, and candidate members of our common family. This region has made remarkable progress over the past decades, yet the balance remains delicate, with the risk of backsliding always present. The future of the Western Balkans lies within the European Union. Greece has been a pioneer in this endeavor through the Thessaloniki Agenda, which set the path for the region's European perspective. And this path must be grounded in full respect for international law, for existing international agreements, the rule of law, human rights, but also minority rights. Most of all, it requires rejecting revisionist agendas and building trust among neighbors. The ghosts of Balkan nationalism have haunted this region for centuries. They must not be allowed to re-emerge. And it's up to the leadership of the Western Balkans to assume their responsibilities and secure a future of peace and prosperity for all their people. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by returning to a topic I also addressed in my speech at the General Assembly last year. Technology is both our greatest shared opportunity and one of the defining challenges of future prosperity. Last year I spoke about artificial intelligence and its extraordinary transformative promise, but I also warned of the danger it breeds. Today, Greece is pursuing a visionary yet practical AI strategy through pilot programs in areas such as education, healthcare, and natural disaster prevention. Teachers and students will soon engage with custom-designated AI teaching assistants. Digital screenings, telemedicine, predictive diagnostics are already making care not just more personalized, but also more accessible. At the same time, AI is helping us detect and contain wildfires at their earlier stages. And the promise of AI making governments more efficient in serving their citizens is materializing at breakneck speed. However, AI in the wrong hands and without safeguards can become extremely dangerous. It can severely impact our children's mental health, flood our public square with disinformation, cause massive displacements in the job market, and concentrate immense power in the hands of a few multinational corporations. And this is why I welcome the United Nations establishment of the Independent International Scientific Panel on AI and the Global Dialogue on Artificial Intelligence Governance. These institutions lay the foundations of a global architecture where artificial intelligence can be steered by science and guided by cooperation. The most urgent task is to protect the mental health of our children. The scientific evidence is damning. We are running a massive, unsupervised experiment with the brains of our children and teenagers. And what was envisioned as a space of connection and creativity has too often become a landscape of manipulation where harmful content reaches even the youngest users. Addictive scrolling is addictive by design, not by accident. And every time I talk to parents, I hear the same story. We're scared about online bullying, adult content, unrealistic standards of beauty, the promotion of self-harm. We feel powerless and helpless. We don't want our kids to share their intimate thoughts and feelings with an AI chatbot. Greece has decided to do something. We have banned our phones in schools, but we have also launched the Kids Wallet, the first government-backed application, giving parents simple, effective control over their kids' smartphone while enabling platforms to verify the age of their users. And our proposal for a pan-European digital age of majority to access digital platforms has already won the support of 13 EU member states. It's examined by the European Commission. But this is not a debate for governments and parents alone. Just as society once set firm rules for smoking, drinking, and wearing a seatbelt, we must now confront today's challenge with equal clarity. Big platforms can no longer profit at the expense of our children's mental health. A business model built capturing our kids' attention through addictive algorithms that feed them what can justifiably be labeled as digital junk is simply not acceptable. And let me repeat what I said last year. Digital technology is no different than any other industry that needs to operate under health and safety regulations. The overarching principle, the golden standard, is one and the same: do no harm. Ladies and gentlemen, looking back at the foundation of the UN means to recall and acknowledge that the need for effective multilateralism is as necessary in 2025 as it was in 1945. And there's no doubt that multilateralism must be reinvigorated. We must make it fit for the challenges of the third decade of the 21st century, but we must do it without disrupting its core, the rules-based order. These rules were agreed for a reason: to save humanity, to ensure progress and prosperity for all. Humanity has paid a very heavy toll through blood, destruction, and suffering to learn this lesson. And we must assume our responsibilities to future generations. Let us not be remembered as those who once again led the world to the brink, and let us not be the sleepwalkers of our time. This time there may be no way back. Instead, let us prove that we have the vision, courage, and resolve to build a world of peace, of security, of shared prosperity, worthy of generations to come. Thank you very much for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Tshering Tobgay, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Kuzuzangpo. Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I bring the warm greetings of His Majesty King Jigme and the prayers of the people of Bhutan for peace, harmony, and progress in our world. Excellencies, 80 years ago, from the devastation of the Second World War, the founders of the United Nations dared to imagine a world at peace. They chose cooperation over conflict, dialogue over division, and hope over despair. They built an institution to protect humanity from its worst instincts and higher risks. Today, our challenge is different, but no less urgent. A planet in a climate crisis, persistent poverty, and conflicts that shatter lives and erode trust among our nations. The Secretary General's UN 80 initiative calls on us to respond with renewed purpose to strengthen the UN's capacity to act decisively on peace, sustainable development, and climate action. Renewed purpose to restore its moral authority. Renewed purpose to make it fit for the purpose of our collective future. Bhutan believes in a United Nations that is representative, responsive, and effective. We seek a multilateralism that delivers results, not just resolutions. That is why Bhutan supports reform of the United Nations, including reform of the Security Council, expanding both permanent and non-permanent membership. A reformed Security Council must include deserving nations such as India and Japan, alongside other capable and leading countries to reflect today's complex realities. As we look toward the UN at 100, let us commit to a world where peace is the norm, where climate is stable, and where every child, no matter where they are born, has the opportunity to grow as productive members of our global community. Bhutan will be an active partner on this journey. We will speak for the poor and vulnerable. We will champion sustainability and climate action. We will promote gross national happiness as an alternate measure of success to the conventional gross domestic product. Excellencies, reform of the United Nations must serve a purpose beyond itself. It must equip the United Nations to confront the defining challenge of our times, the climate crisis. In Bhutan, we have endeavored to protect our forests, keep our rivers pristine, and we take pride in being carbon negative. Each year, we sequester over 5 times more carbon than we emit, a contribution far exceeding our size and resources. Yet, we are already confronting the harsh realities of climate change. Our mountains are warming at nearly twice the global average. Centuries-old glaciers are shrinking at alarming rates. Rivers that once flowed steadily now swell unpredictably into destructive floods during the summer and often dry up in the winter. This is not a distant threat. It is here. It is now. And it demands immediate, urgent action. Every country must strive to reduce emissions and aim for carbon neutrality. This we know, yet global efforts remain far behind what the science demands. As of today, only 4 countries, Bhutan, Panama, Suriname, and Madagascar, just 4 countries are carbon neutral. At COP29 last year, our countries came together. The 4 countries came together to launch the G0 Forum, a coalition of carbon neutral nations committed to accelerating climate ambition. Our message is clear. Net zero cannot be the finish line. It must be the starting point. Every nation must work urgently to slash emissions and achieve carbon neutrality. On our part, we will share best practices from forest conservation to sustainable agriculture. We will share technologies from renewable energy systems to low-emission transport. We will champion nature-based solutions because forests and wetlands are not just landscapes. They are like vital organs, the lungs, the kidneys of our planet. And we will push ambition beyond pledges. We will demand measurable results. We invite all countries and partners to join G0 in this noble effort. The science is unequivocal. The solution exists. The only question is, do we have the will? Excellencies, while reform of the United Nations and urgent climate actions are essential, this alone will not be enough. We must now reimagine the future we want. According to the United Nations, over half of humanity now lives in urban areas. And by 2050, nearly 70%, close to 7 billion people, will call cities home. Cities drive over 80% of global GDP, but they also account for more than 70% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions. This makes cities both the engines of innovation and the front lines of our greatest challenges. Challenges like unsustainable consumption, environmental degradation, and rising inequality. We face a choice. We can keep building cities that consume more than they give, or we can reimagine and redesign our cities that heal, that sustain, that uplift. 50 years ago, Bhutan offered the world gross national happiness, an alternate approach to development. Today, under the visionary leadership of His Majesty King Jigme, Bhutan offers the world an alternate approach to urban living, the Gaelifu Mindfulness City, a city founded on the values of sustainability, harmony, spirituality, and the ideals of gross national happiness. The Gaelifu Mindfulness City is a special administrative region that is already taking shape in Bhutan. With executive and legislative autonomy, as well as an independent judiciary now established, preparatory works are already underway and economic clusters are being advanced. The Gaelifu Mindfulness City is not an idea on paper. It is a living project in action. The Gaelifu Mindfulness City will not be a city of glass towers and unchecked sprawl. Instead, it will be a place where modernity and tradition meet, where nature is the foundation of urban living. Powered by renewable energy, built with sustainable materials, and designed for low-carbon living, it will offer inclusive housing, green public spaces, and meaningful jobs. For Bhutan, the Mindfulness City is a strategic step, a step towards taking gross national happiness to the next level, a step towards advancing prosperity, and a step towards fostering deeper global engagement without losing our identity or our bond with nature. But the Gaelifu Mindfulness City is not just Bhutan's project. It could serve as a forerunner in rethinking urbanization, a model city built on the values of mindfulness, sustainability, and shared harmony. I extend a warm invitation to all of you to join us in this exciting journey. A journey to bring a royal vision to life. A vision of how cities and urban living can heal, can inspire, and can sustain both humankind and nature. Excellencies, the founders of the United Nations gave us more than an institution. They gave us an inheritance of hope and the solemn responsibility to carry that hope forward. In this spirit, and mindful of the troubled times we live in, I have the pleasure of announcing that Bhutan will host the Global Peace Prayer Festival later this year. From the 4th to the 17th of November this year, the Global Peace Prayer Festival will unite spiritual masters, scholars, and practitioners from across the world and across traditions in a common aspiration for peace, healing, and harmony. Through the recitation of the Melam Chemo, or Global Peace Prayers, the sacred Bhazaguru Mantra, the Kala Chakra Empowerment, and the powerful Jabji Gap ritual, Bhutan seeks to offer not only a spiritual event, but also a diplomatic and cultural contribution to world peace. For Bhutan, it is both a privilege and a prayer that in these turbulent times, the voice of a small Himalayan nation can help nurture the great cause of peace for all humanity. We extend a warm welcome to all who wish to join the Global Peace Prayer Festival. Excellencies, this is our moment. Let ours be the generation that reforms the United Nations. the generation that confronts the climate crisis with urgency and unity, the generation that makes peace not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, opportunity, and dignity for all. And when the United Nations marks its 100th anniversary, we will proudly affirm that we honored the vision of those who came before us and inspired hope for those who will follow. Thank you for your kind attention. Tashidele.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Bhutan. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Mia Amo Motley, Prime Minister and Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. The 21st century has been marked by a series of crises for which our world has been unprepared. Financial crisis that started in 2008, which then triggered fiscal crises across many of the world's countries. And if that was not enough, a social crisis characterized by rising inequality with the consequences thereto, be it substance abuse, mental health challenges, homelessness, or human trafficking. Then there was a global pandemic, lasting 2 to 3 years and taking the lives of millions of people. And for those surviving, they had restricted movement and restricted choices. All of this, my friends, has been exacerbated by the spreading of fake news. This distorts reality and threatens the stability of our societies, creating a platform for hate to thrive and prejudice to rise. But deeper than all of these crises is a bigger, more insidious crisis that is undermining our domestic and global institutions that have promoted order, peace, and prosperity. It is, my friends, the crisis of truth. Excellencies, when we lose shared truth, our communities, our countries, our global society loses their center of gravity. At first, the damage may seem quiet. Words bend and facts drift in the service of political point scoring. But slowly, over time, we descend into political tribalism. We develop alternative realities and we are unable to understand each other and communicate with each other because we lack a center. Then we grow suspicious of each other. In the absence of truth, trust deteriorates. And we see it all around us, in global forums and indeed on the blocks and in the communities in our own countries. Trust between neighbors, trust between the governed and the governing, trust in our instructions, trust in our social order, trust in our health systems, trust in our global rules, governance structures. It all seems, in the words of Chinua Achebe, to be falling apart. When we lack truth and we lack trust, law becomes theater, news becomes spectacle, and science becomes just another opinion. As I've had cause to say in this great hall on a few times, our world today worryingly resembles the world of 100 years ago. And this has become even more evident with the closing of our borders to both goods and to people. This has magnified the geopolitical tensions which had already taken root. Disturbingly, War, regrettably, has only entered the daily lexicon of the West, not when thousands were dying on the continent of Africa or in Myanmar, but when war came to Europe. Nevertheless, we still call for peace in the Ukraine. Only yesterday, a leading British newspaper reminded us that for 500 days, 260,000 people, virtually the population of my country, 260,000 people have been trapped in the Sudanese city of El Fasher. The article reported that while political progress stalls, those who attempt to escape are killed, and those who remain inside are starved. The world must not ignore the horror in Sudan. And of course, I don't need to remind you that it must not ignore the horror in Gaza. The genocidal destruction taking place in both places must now have our full attention. And as it relates to Gaza, yes, there must be a release of the hostages taken on October 7th. But we have now gone to a point where all of our human sensibilities are offended by the continuous and disproportionate attacks on the Palestinian people and the failure to allow access by the international community to the survivors for the provision of humanitarian aid. The survivors are entitled, my friends, to use the words of Bob Marley. How can you be sitting there telling me that you care, when every time I look around, the people suffer in the suffering in every way, in everywhere? My friends, it calls to mind the Roman historian Tacitus, who quoted a Scottish chieftain fighting against the military might of the Roman Empire. And I mention only the last two sentences. They plunder, they butcher, they ravish, they make it desert and call it peace. They make it desert and they call it peace. The real tragedy of war is that these children, when they become grandparents, will still be answering the innocent questions posed by their grandchildren 70, 80 years from now as to how they lost their limbs. Granny, how did you lose your leg? And when they answer, we run the risk that the violence and hate will be perpetuated for another 2 to 3 generations. This is not why we have come together. This is not good. And Madam President, it is happening under our watch. We can and we must do better to secure the peace across the world in the name of the children. And let me say that at the very least, the international community must immediately find the funding to support the children of Gaza and the children of Sudan for the next 3 months. UNICEF has said that in Gaza it is $66 million that is needed for the next 3 months. And in Sudan it is $200 million. The money is mostly nutrition related, to reverse or to mitigate famine for children, and to provide water and sanitation and health interventions. And we should note that there have been multiple disease outbreaks, including cholera. So, Madam President, to be very clear as I move on, a lasting peace can never be achieved through violence, not continued bombing. It can only be achieved through justice as our guide and dialogue, talking. And lest we forget, where others are seeking to build the peace and to preserve humanity in Gaza, as we saw, the international community must not condone the bombing of those states who look to facilitate peace. It is a red line that we must never cross. Madam President, I say simply again, another year, the world needs a reset. We must find, first and foremost, whether we still agree on the same values that inform our charter. As simple as this seems, this is necessary in any reset. For values we all know have changed over the last 80 years, and we cannot assume that it is business as usual. And if it is not available to all of us to agree to those values, then we must at least know who does and who doesn't. In addition to our inability to bring about peace in multiple conflicts, there really still are a number of issues that threaten our way of life and the stability of our planet beyond war. The climate crisis, food insecurity, water scarcity, mass flow of refugees and displaced persons, poverty and increasing inequality within and between societies. It has become so insidious that people don't even talk about it sufficiently. And of course, the failing spectacle of the SDGs for too many of our countries and people across the world. And of course, unregulated AI, which, while it has tremendous promise, poses unregulated significant risk. Many of our people ask every day, why has the United Nations not done better recently? The simple truth, my friends, is that countries have lacked the political will to live by the Charter and to do what is right for humanity. Countries of different sizes, capacities, and cultures can only survive in this world in which we live if we maintain a rules-based system. It is no different to what we have to do in our own countries to maintain and protect the vulnerable and the weak. In fact, it's no different than what has to be done in a child's playground. The rules-based system is what protects us from bullying and from rogue behavior. Our charter was designed to promote compassion, equality, fairness. And this is why it is imperative that we maintain a rules-based system. I speak as a leader of a small country. Our future is placed at risk unless we preserve this rules-based system. The law of the jungle does not guarantee any of us a future on a livable, or indeed doesn't guarantee us a livable planet. We have simply to step up to the plate. And unlike the West Indian Federation, when one country left and the maths of the day was 1 from 10 leaves 0, we must remember that if there are those who don't want to be inside at the dance, that 1 or 2 or 3 from 193 does not leave 0. Does not leave 0. Those of us who remain can continue to pursue our vital interests. And we don't criticize countries for making sovereign decisions because that's what governments were elected to do. If that's not what they want, that's not what they want. But let us get on with the business and protect our vital interests of preserving a rules-based system, to strengthen us, to build peace, to allow us to better face challenges from climate to pandemics to unregulated AI, and generally to build a better life for our people. There is no doubt that there is a case for efficiency gains to be made in this United Nations institutional framework. We know that. But once we finish the efficiency gains, member states who want or need a rules-based order must put their money where their mouth is. If we are to be protected by a rules-based system, then we must step up to the plate and provide the funds to bridge the gap, to deliver the results that we desire. We must move from short pants to long pants and understand that we can no longer complain about the absence or behavior of a country and not ourselves be prepared to make wrong things right. It is as simple as that. And believe me, The arithmetic is not bad. It is within each of our reach to reach there, to do it. And let us remember the Aristotelian principle, equality among equals, proportionality among unequals. My friends, and while we contemplate the multiple crises, let us also not despair, because there are some things that have worked for the benefit of our people in the last few years. We now have, globally, a historic pandemic agreement that was adopted to make the world equitable, more equitable, and safer from future pandemics. A full appreciation of this will only come when the next pandemic hits us. We have agreed to the Seville Commitment on Finance, which seeks to fulfill the promise of the SDGs, and which, even though the funding has not been fully identified, has mainstreamed a number of financing concepts that were simply not taken into account a decade ago. Debt swaps, natural disaster clauses, or what they call climate resilient debt clauses. These are the things that we advocated in the Bridgetown Initiative. We have committed, also as a world, last year here, to an ambitious global action plan to combat antimicrobial resistance. And what does that have to do with any of us in here? I've said repeatedly, this is the silent, slow-motion pandemic of the 21st century and threatens to reverse a century of medical progress. And when we know people who die from hospital-aided infections, we understand the importance of the vital steps taken here. Earlier this week, we successfully brought into force the Beyond Boundaries and National Jurisdiction Treaty. As a large ocean state, as Barbados is, I am acutely aware of the critical importance to protect our oceans and its marine biodiversity as part of the ecological balance of the planet. And last year, we adopted the ambitious Pact for the Future, which provides a roadmap, a North Star, for our work to protect people and planet of the future. The two instruments mentioned on Tuesday morning by our Secretary General for regulating AI must now be our priority if we are to avoid the severe deepening inequality of our times and to avoid leaving our people exposed to the risk and exploitation of AI and the distortion of facts. I must tell you that regrettably, I have experienced on a well-known commercial AI platform examples of censorship that seek to deny access to the details of our history in this hemisphere, in terms of the Barbados Slave Code, in terms of the South Carolina Slave Code. So we must be vigilant. Speaking as a small country, therefore, we see no future without a rules-based system. And before I go on, let me recognize the outgoing President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Philemon Yang, for his impactful presidency last year. And let me also congratulate Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock for assuming the presidency, particularly in this year when we celebrate Beijing +30. Barbados looks forward to working with you, ma'am, to execute your vision. The fact that you are only the 5th woman to occupy this post over the last 80 years is a cause both for profound concern, but I say renewed optimism. This is a testament to the very point that I'm seeking to make. The organization is working, even if not at optimal levels, but we still have so much to do. Madam President, on climate finance, climate and finance, I should say, there's a real danger that debates in this great chamber, at the conference of the parties and elsewhere, risk being reduced to mere performative exercises. We have watched the widely celebrated green wave which swept Europe in 2019. We've seen it now recede, and in its backwash, that continent now faces deep division over the scale, scope, and speed of delivery on commitments made to eliminate climate harm and pollution by 2050. We've seen others withdraw from the Paris Agreement. At a time, Madam President, when we should be conducting an audit of the achieved targets and accomplished deliverables, we continue for the most part to receive IOUs and statements of deferred intent, even as we have witnessed this vacillation that I just referred to. We've also seen a rededication to breathing new life into high carbon and high polluting forms of energy. And we have witnessed a redoubling of efforts to fund military buildups, even at the expense of financing our way to sustainability and that of a livable planet. Barbados does not treat climate science as a mere conjecture, and neither does the International Court of Justice nor the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Their advisory opinions have affirmed the legal rights and entitlements of citizens who must on a daily basis confront the impact of the climate crisis. In this regard, we especially welcome the International Court of Justice's ruling to the effect that states have obligations to protect the climate system and other parts of the environment from emissions, and that those obligations can be enforced against other states. Given this new reality as we look ahead, we must seize the opportunity to find common ground, given the diversity of opinions on this question of the climate crisis. I propose that one possible way forward is to focus on emissions rather than focusing on the fossil fuel industry. As I've said before, the fossil fuel industry is not the enemy. It is the emissions. In this regard, we should consider working towards a globally legal binding framework on methane, which could contribute to reversing global temperatures, I'm told by the scientists, by as much as 0.5 degrees, while purchasing time for the fossil fuel industry to scale up to a commercial level the use of decarbonizing technology. This is possible. The Baku to Belém roadmap must also ensure that the necessary resources, $1.3 trillion annually by 2035, are not only committed, but delivered. It is the political will and the ingenuity of countries and financial institutions that will ensure that these sums can be delivered. It must not, and we must not allow that roadmap to suffer the same fate as the Loss and Damage Fund, which, despite its historic establishment, remains grossly undercapitalized, with less than $800 million pledged, and regrettably, only half of those pledges have actually materialized. This ambivalence towards finance and fiscal space, my friends, is what gave birth to the Bridgetown Initiative. Its latest iteration, Bridgetown 3.0, will shortly be reviewed, given the rapidly changing global environment in which we live. We still need to expand liquidity support and to close the financing gap to assist vulnerable countries, especially the V20, many of whom still face the possibility of a debt crisis. They need it to build their resilience and to adapt to the new climate reality. I am conscious of the progress by which multilateral institutions have taken on board some of our arguments in the Bridgetown Initiative, especially as it relates to climate finance and to the issue of vulnerability. I referred earlier to debt swaps and the climate resilient debt clauses. Madam President, all of these goals and many more can be achieved by a fully functional rules-based system, one that is ambitious in its goals, effective in its delivery, and fair in its organization. As UN80 process seeks to enhance the functioning of this organization, we must ensure that we put in place the initiatives that are not the exclusive outgrowth of budget constraints and cross-cutting exercises, but are instead initiatives that are people-focused, delivery-driven, providing the global population with the peace and the security and the quality of life that they deserve and that they are increasingly demanding. To this effect, the Security Council, we know, must be reformed. It must reflect the multipolar world that we now live in, and it must give an opportunity to recognize that there have been substantial geopolitical shifts since 1962 when you had your last reform. 3 years before I was born, and I turn 60 next week. Permanent seats for Africa and a seat that revolves for small island developing states are an essential part of that reform, because we all have perspectives that must be heard. You cannot ask us really to show up for family photos and votes when you need them, and then exclude us from the family's decision-making as if you are the grown-ups and we are the children. We are not minors. We are independent, sovereign states with full capacity, and we insist on being treated as such. Madam President, I have left the peace and security of our Caribbean region for last. It is deeply troubling. Example, Haiti, and you've heard Prime Minister Gonzalez speak eloquently this morning on these matters. Haiti, which was once a beacon of emancipation and revolution for all of us as black people, is today a victim of centuries of external interference and contemporary internal conflict, and regrettably, even blindness. We want to thank Kenya for its extraordinary leadership of the multinational security support mission, even when they were out there on their own. We look forward to the enhanced support of the UN Security Council and the Organization of American States, even as we maintain a strong watching brief for this valued member of our Caribbean community as CARICOM. Haiti requires, I've said it over and over, a long-term support plan that addresses security and development, not one at the expense of the other. With the requisite political will, the UN Security Council and the international development system are well equipped. They have the resources and power to deliver. We also want to urge dialogue with our friends and partners, especially in the United States, on the inescapable issue on the flow of small arms and light weapons, not only to Haiti, but indeed across this entire hemisphere, especially in the Caribbean with small states. Fragile economies in the democracies of the Caribbean community are now being threatened by this incessant flow of illegally obtained weapons and increasingly organized criminal elements which utilize them. But we will use the systems to deal with them collectively and in accordance with due process. We thank Secretary General Guterres for his unswerving support with respect to Haiti, and we now need others on board to ensure that Haiti can turn the corner and prepare itself for free and fair democratic elections. Madam President, Cuba has long been a source of support for many across the globe in times of conflict, health crises, and indeed colonial resistance, particularly in Africa. Cuba has paid, however, a high price for insisting on its right to self-determination. And again, yet again, we must be prepared to engage in dialogue in order to stop the disproportionate suffering and the deprivation that is being inflicted on the Cuban society by what is now globally seen to be an unjust embargo and other unilateral coercive measures. Barbados, my friends, reiterates its call for the end of the embargo and the removal of Cuba from the list of state sponsors of terrorism. This is unjust. What is even more, in the Caribbean Sea, we're now seeing a shocking violation of a hemispheric understanding that the Caribbean be treated as a zone of peace. There has been a buildup in military assets in the last few weeks in the Caribbean by both sides, by the United States of America and by Venezuela. We believe that any such buildup could occasion just an accident. And if it does, a simple accident can put the Southern Caribbean at disproportionate risk. I need not tell you, therefore, what a war can do. It is not acceptable for our islands, our countries, to be viewed as collateral damage. I say simply, for all who can hear and for all who read and can listen, full respect for the territorial integrity of each and every state in the Caribbean must be respected, and that includes all states. Almost all wars end as a result of dialogue. Let us make a greater effort to have the necessary conversations to prevent war. It is too simple. As I close today, I leave you with an image that has stayed with me for the last week of a young Palestinian girl of 6 or 7 years old walking in the midst of the rubble in Gaza. Her eyes were hollow and full of despair. It was clear that she was in great pain, but she carried her sister on her shoulders, both shoulders, clearly recognizing that it was she who would have to carry the burden of taking them to safety. My friends, this is the ultimate picture for me of hope and resilience. Let us be inspired that even in the face of the greatest adversity and challenges that the world faces, that we too can rise. For if a 6-year-old can push past the pain, all the physical and emotional pain, and still find hope that there's a better moment ahead of her, then we as leaders and members of the global community have a duty to summon that spirit. The world needs it now more than ever. It is not beyond us to forge a better world that is fair and just. 80 years ago, it was just a few countries that summoned that will. Today, those of us who were denied the right to be heard then must now be the core responders to this critical clarion call. I leave you inspired by the words of my own anthem as I think about the world. Inspired, I say, upwards and onwards we shall go, inspired, exulting, free, and greater will our world grow in strength and unity. If a 6-year-old child can summon the will against all that she faced, then we, with much, much, much more, and with a commitment and an obligation to many, 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 many more, must summon that will. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister, Minister for National Security and the Public Service, and Minister for Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment of Barbados. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jeremiah Manele, Prime Minister of Solomon Islands. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Your Excellencies, heads of states and heads of governments, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Madam President, I bring to you and all members of this august assembly warm island greetings from the government and people of the Happy Isles. We congratulate you, Madam President, on your assumption of office as President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Let me also commend your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang, for his sterling leadership of the 79th session of the General Assembly. Solomon Islands further acknowledge the Secretary General of the United Nations for his courage and strength in defending multilateralism. As we gather under the theme, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights, I am reminded of the words of John Ellison, and I quote, "There is no peace without development, no development without peace, and neither without respect for human rights." End of quote. These words reflect the essence of our journey over the past 8 decades. We celebrate our collective triumph of humanity when we choose unity over division, cooperation over conflict, and justice over indifference. 80 years ago, in the aftermath of the Second World War, the world chose to build than destroy. The United Nations Charter is a covenant of hope, peace, and progress. It is based on the principle of sovereign equality, one country, one vote. The United Nations has since grown from 51 to 193 member states, becoming a force for development, human rights, and humanitarian support, giving voice to the vulnerable and inspiring global progress and prosperity. This is the proud legacy of the United Nations, a legacy that I pray must not only be cherished, but also carried forward with renewed vigor and purpose. Madam President, we meet at a moment of profound uncertainty, marked by deepening conflicts, armed aggression, widening inequalities, and the growing disregard for international law. The erosion of the United Nations Charter principles, the alarming return of unilateralism, threatens the very foundation of our multilateral system. We note the deep concern that the world is now overarmed, spending less on development, and increasingly adopted a militarized posture. We need to halt and reverse these non-peaceful trends. We seek a region free from nuclear weapons, militarization, trafficking of illicit drugs, and geopolitical posturing. My sub-region recently adopted the Ocean of Peace Declaration. It is rooted in the Pacific's collective history and culture. It is our collective vision for a resilient, peaceful, and a prosperous blue Pacific continent. We reclaim our sovereignty, support multilateralism, and a rules-based international order grounded on international law. This week, Solomon Islands signed onto the Declaration for the Protection of Humanitarian Personnel, noting that 380 humanitarian personnel paid the ultimate sacrifice last year. It is our collective responsibility to respect international humanitarian law, protect the safety of humanitarian personnel and civilians, and instill accountabilities for all in disaster and war zones. Madam President, climate change is a crisis multiplier that is defining our future. The World Meteorological Organization declared 2024 was the warmest year on record. This pushes us further off track from the 1.5 degrees goal we agreed to in Paris. Solomon Islands, despite having a minimal carbon footprint, has submitted an ambitious net positive third national determination contribution, NDC. We can do more with international partnerships, investing in reforestation and the conservation of our forest, including renewable energy investments. We need urgent and ambitious climate action now that puts us on a 1.5 degrees pathway. Large emitters and those with historical responsibility must take the lead in drastically cutting emissions. Contrary to what we heard here a few days ago, the science on climate is clear, and my people are suffering from it. On 23 July 2025, the International Court of Justice, ICJ, issued a landmark advisory opinion in response to a request by the United Nations General Assembly under Resolution 77276. The court was asked to address two interrelated questions. First, the obligation of states under international law to protect the climate system from harmful greenhouse gas emissions, including duties owed to both present and future generations, in keeping with the principle of intergenerational equity. Second, the legal consequences for states whose actions or inactions cause significant harm to the climate system and the environment. This includes the responsibilities owed to injured or especially affected states, such as small and developing states that suffer the greatest impacts despite contributing the least, as well as to peoples and individuals, including future generations whose fundamental rights and livelihoods are threatened. Solomon Islands welcome the historical advisory opinion of the ICJ and support ongoing process for a follow-up UN resolution. Madam President, the court has made clear that states carry binding obligations to act on climate change, to prevent harm, to cooperate, and to protect the rights of both present and future generations. These duties are legal, moral, and universal, and hold states accountable to stop harmful practices, to prevent repetition, and to repair the damage caused. Madam President, Solomon Islands also raised the issue of climate displacement. Entire communities are already at risk of losing their homes and homelands. The court has now confirmed that the principle of non-refoulement applies, which means that no state can lawfully return people to places where climate change makes survival impossible. This is indeed a powerful affirmation that rights to life, food, water, and habitable land must be protected. For us small island developing states, this recognition is existential, and it reminds us that climate obligations are erga omnes, owed to the world as a whole, demanding collective responsibility for a shared future. The court's opinion is a powerful reminder and a fervent call that better together we are bound by law and by duty to act. It rejected narrow interpretations that limit obligations to the Paris Agreement, affirming instead that all states must cut emissions under human rights law, the law of the sea, customary international law, and other treaties. It made clear that the 1.5 degrees Celsius target is legally binding, that major emitters cannot evade responsibility, even those outside the Paris Agreement, and that breaches will carry consequences, including reparations for harm caused and accountability for failing to address fossil fuel production, subsidies, and consumption. For small and developing states, this opinion brings hope and recognition. It affirms that even if rising seas inundate our islands, our statehood and maritime boundaries, will endure, preserving our sovereignty and our rights. Madam President, this is more than a legal finding. It is indeed a call to the international community that only better together can we honor the 1.5 degrees Celsius commitment, protect the most vulnerable, and secure a just and sustainable future for all nations and peoples. Solomon Islands wishes to acknowledge the exemplary leadership of Vanuatu and the tireless efforts of Pacific youth who have stood at the forefront of this initiative. Their voices and vision have carried the urgency of our cause onto the global stage, reminding us that the strength of the Pacific lies in our unity. Though small in size, our island nations are large in purpose. And when we stand together, governments, communities, and young people alike, we embody the very theme of this assembly: better together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. As Pacific Islands Forum Chair, I am pleased to announce the establishment of the Pacific Resilience Facility. It is a Pacific-owned and Pacific-led response to the escalating impacts of climate change and disasters on our peoples. Our goal is to capitalize the fund by USD 500 million by the end of 2026. We acknowledge partners and investors who have pledged USD 166 million. We call for more partnerships for the facility. On the question of COP31, Solomon Islands supports Australia's bid to host COP31. It will provide a vital opportunity for the Pacific to amplify its voice and demand stronger climate action. Madam President, as a big ocean state with 98% of our territory covered by ocean, the lives and livelihoods of our people are inextricably linked to the health and resilience of the marine environment. Solomon Islands is proud to stand among the 60 countries that have ratified the BNJ agreement, and we look forward with great anticipation to its entry into force early next year. While the BBNJ agreement is a critical step forward for the stewardship of the world's oceans, it must be accompanied by robust conservation and sustainable use within areas of national jurisdiction. At the United Nations Ocean Conference, at the third United Nations Ocean Conference, Solomon Islands launched the Melanesian Ocean Reserve Initiative. The initiative unites sovereign nations, sovereign oceans, under indigenous stewardship to support ecological resilience and sustainable growth, using both traditional knowledge and scientific research in line with international standards. We are also actively advancing community-based conservation initiatives and undertaking significant efforts in ocean management in alignment with our national ocean policy. This year, Solomon Islands co-hosted a summit on SDG 14.4 with several UN and regional partners. The event gathered Pacific leaders, fisheries organizations, the private sector, and scientists to assess global health of tuna stocks, climate impacts, and strengthen partnerships on small-scale fisheries. Its conclusions were presented at the third UN conference in Nice. Over half of the world's tuna is caught in Pacific waters, and all 4 species, albacore, yellowfin, big eye, and skipjack, remain biologically healthy. Our region stands ready to collaborate with the international community and share our experience in fisheries management and restoring fishing zones to sustainable level based on science. This is proof that when we act together as stewards of the ocean, Solomon Islands is an archipelagic state that shares maritime border with 5 neighboring countries. Earlier this year, Solomon Islands made 2 continental self-submissions to the United Nations Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, a bilateral submission with Fiji concerning the Melanesian border plateau, and a trilateral submission with Fiji and Vanuatu for the North Fiji Basin. Solomon Islands looks forward to engaging constructively with the Commission on these matters in the spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. The alarming rate of pollution in the ocean is endangering marine life and the ocean's health. We have banned the use of certain single-use of plastic in 2023. But we remain very concerned that negotiations on a legally binding treaty on plastic pollution has stalled. We have a collective interest to finalize that treaty and protect our ocean. On deep-sea mining, Solomon Islands is taking a precautionary approach and has placed a moratorium on it. On the same note, we support a regional approach on deep-sea mining as agreed to by our forum leaders early this month. Madam President, only 35% of SDGs are on track to meet their targets by 2030. The Pact of the Future was our collective commitment to turbocharge sustainable development. We can and must deliver on this pledge. Solomon Islands government's policy to achieve the SDGs and address our development challenges centers on 4 pillars: unity and stability, economic transformation, game-changing infrastructure development, and human capital development. These priorities are supported by reforms, responsible investments, climate-resilient infrastructure, and human resource development. We are prioritizing the productive sector to drive economic transformation with strategic focus on agriculture, fisheries, tourism, and mining. This is reflected in our national budget to enable private sector-led growth. As Solomon Islands prepares for LDC graduation in 2027, strengthening trade relations and these development areas remain critical. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the importance of global cooperation in health, including the sharing of medical technology. In this connection, Solomon Islands welcome the endorsement of the Pandemic Treaty adopted at the 78th session of the World Health Assembly and looks forward to its full implementation. Non-communicable diseases, NCD, has reached crisis level in the Pacific. In the case of Solomon Islands, 87% of deaths are NCD related. NCD accounts for 84% of Solomon Islands adult hospital admission, placing stress on our health system. This year, we have significantly increased our health budget to restore health services and manage NCDs and neglected diseases. Solomon Islands welcomes the convening of the high-level meeting on NCDs and mental health. The Pacific is confronted with rising mental health and abuse of drugs. Integrating the 2 health issues into primary health care, supported by trained health workers to support, screen, manage the well-being of our people. Madam President, my delegation welcomes the Secretary General's reform agenda, the UN 80 initiative, and the vision to revitalize the United Nations and its operations. The UN must evolve with the new realities and remain responsive to the special circumstances and needs of SEEDs and LDCs. We support China's global governance initiative to strengthen multilateralism, preserve sovereign equality of states, observe international law, and placing people-centered development with an action-oriented approach. Solomon Islands support ongoing efforts to develop a governance framework to manage responsible use of artificial intelligence for development, combat misinformation, cybersecurity challenges, protection of data and privacy. These are new and emerging issues we cannot ignore. Madam President, Solomon Islands reiterates its call for an elevated UN presence. The time has come to review the UN regional architecture to ensure it remains connected to the members that need it most. Solomon Islands remains underrepresented within the UN staff establishment. We call on the UN to consider convening in-country competitive recruitment exams in Solomon Islands. On Security Council reform, we seek a more democratic, expanded council that reflects today's geopolitical realities. The use of the veto by the Council